Are the maned wolf and bush dog good evidence for the power of evolution, the power of mutations? That was the challenge to me, brought to me by Dr. Thompson. And we're here to revisit that as I respond to the evidence that he brought. So, welcome, Dr. Thompson. Thanks for being here. Do you want to say anything?
Oh, hold on one moment. I think I actually
You can't
have.
hear me.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. I think I have you playing background. So 1 second. Hold on.
Okay. No problem. I'm just going to go ahead and bring up my slides. So,
Sure.
but let me know when you can hear me because I don't want you to, miss my response. So, basically, this was the evidence that was brought to me. So, we're looking at the maned wolf and the bush dog, which look quite a bit different. They have a lot of different features, but they happen to be very genetically similar. In fact, more similar to each other than to any of the other canids. So this is, can you hear me okay?
I can. Yeah, I was
Okay,
actually
good.
hearing you twice. That was the problem because I think I had your YouTube link up in a separate window, and that was a little confusing to hear you twice. But yeah, I can hear you just fine. Thanks.
Yeah. Now you started off by presenting this chart and saying that that basically all creationists agree that the animals on this chart, except for the outgroup, are from a common ancestor. Now, when I looked that up, I found several creationist sources that did not agree with that.
Oh,
Okay.
right.
So, in fact, and I'll give you the reasons why. And in the description of this video, I linked one of those sources. So, one of them did kind of a look at the COI 5P region of the mitochondrial DNA and was able to easily come to a consensus sequence for like the basically domestic dog wolf group. Okay. Because they're only like 16 uh, mutations apart. Okay. So uh, he, he, he believes that that is, those have a common ancestor. But it was much harder with the foxes. And so there were a lot more differences with the foxes, and it was difficult to come to a consensus sequence. So he determined based on that he does not believe that those have a common ancestor. And there are other creationists that agree with that as well. But you can, read that article if you're interested in that.
Yeah.
So I'm not assuming a common ancestor for all of these canids. And, I'm not taking an actual position right now, but I would say, based on what I found, there's good reason to think they don't all have a common ancestor.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Did they say anything about the ancestry of the South American canids?
I don't think so, not in that source. So, but and so but I will give you, my findings on that as we go on, based on
Right.
the paper that you gave me to read.
Sure.
So,
Mhm.
let's talk about the evidence that you presented that, this is the power of mutation for innovation. So, your evidence is the bush dog and maned wolf are the most genetically similar of the canids. And no, okay.
Just to clarify, they are
Yeah.
more similar to each other than they are to any other canid. There are
Oh,
plenty of
yeah,
other
and
canids that are much more
okay,
similar to each other than the bush dog is to the Maine wolf.
okay, yeah, and maybe I should have spoken that a little bit differently, but that is what I meant to say.
Okay.
So, okay, so the private, and they have private alleles. Okay, so those private alleles are evidence that the Maine wolf has undergone evolution to produce those private alleles, and the bush dog as well. I only wrote Maine wolf, but I mean for the bush dog. Is that good? Okay. So, and you showed this chart, and this is kind of a chart showing the private alleles in red and you talked about how we've done in this study that you presented. And by the way, I just have to stop and say thank you for doing it this way.
Hmm.
You came with a clear piece of evidence. You had your evidence ready to present. You had a tangible source that I could look up and look for myself. And this is exactly what I'm looking for people to bring evidence for evolution, because this is the kind of stuff that we can actually
Mhm.
evaluate, right? And so thank you for just being really methodical about how you
Sure.
did this. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Just a point of clarification, the red points are highlighted private alleles that the authors wanted to highlight. There were other private alleles that were specific to the bush dog and the Maine wolf that are shown on this figure, because basically dots that are really, really tall are really above the that line. Those are considered alleles that are specific to either one or the other. And so there's like several hundred that are private between one species or the other. They're highlighting some of them. So the red ones are not just the only private alleles.
Okay, got it. And I think the reason they're highlighted red is the ones that are related to limb length,
I
right? Is
think that
that
that's right. Yeah, because
okay?
they point out that there were 110 private alleles in the Maine wolf, and then between the bush dog and the Maine wolf, there were 12 private alleles that are seem to be involved in limb length, controlling limb length. That's correct. And I think that
Okay.
the red ones are the ones that are the limb length ones. Yeah.
Okay. Now you brought up that these private alleles have, like, they're part of, like, huge morphological differences between these creatures. So you said, the limb growth, that we can definitely see a major difference between the maned wolf's long legs and the bush dog's short webbed feet, right? And
Okay. Just to
d-
clarify,
okay.
the didn't mean to keep interrupting. No, yes, they have short, stubby legs. I'm not claiming, and I don't think the authors claim, that the web feet are also due to these same private alleles that are associated with limb length. That it is true that the bush dog has web feet, which is largely unique amongst the other canids. Now, I know that there are certain breeds of dogs that also have some web feeding, but the of the South American canids, the bush dog is the only species that has web feet, and yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. And yeah, so but basically the things that they have that are really morphologically different are the limbs,
Yep.
right? And the feet.
I
And
mean,
then
it's quite a
mhm,
bit more than that, I think, but yes, the limbs are an obvious distinction. The web feeding is, of course, unique. There are some other unique things, of course, about Maine wolves relative to bush dogs. As you point out, there's this big difference in digestion as well. That the Maine wolf has a sort of unique digestion amongst all the canids, and that the bush dog is somewhat unique in being hypercarnivorous, whereas most other canids species are carnivores, but they can tolerate and eat um, other things than just meat. Yep.
right. And so, like, these are the things that are being presented as the differences, and
Right.
a lot of them were studied in this paper that you gave me
Right.
about, the comparative genomics, and they found that some of these differences look like they're due to these private alleles, like these private alleles are contributing to these things, right?
I will say that what the authors do, as far as the extent of what they are able to draw conclusions on, is that they see a number of private alleles that seem to be associated with these also unique adaptations to the bush dog and the Maine wolf. I would certainly argue that there needs to be additional work done to experimentally show that that's indeed the case. But this is a good starting point at determining which genes might be have undergone natural selection, and the kind of changes that would have occurred after the divergence between the common ancestor for the bush dog and the Maine wolf that would have allowed to them to have these very unique adaptations. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, have I, like, fairly presented your evidence? Is there anything that I've left out of the evidence that you presented?
So, yeah, so far so good with my little changes and caveats, but you were 90% of the way there anyway. So yes, the only thing that I would also add, but was, to be fair, something that I didn't emphasize is the larger phylogenetic tree. But I'm happy to talk about these things initially if that's where you want to start.
No, let me finish with the
Mhm.
bush
Sure.
dog main
Yeah,
wolf
yeah,
before we go into talking
that's
about
fine. Yeah,
anything
yeah,
else.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and so what I want to say about this is, first, we have no disagreement about examination of genes to see which ones are related to limb growth, fruit eating, etc. So I have no problem with the study and looking at, hey, let's see, what contributes to limb growth. Let's see. So we don't have a disagreement on that. Okay. But what we disagree on is our conclusion. And that is because of our differing presuppositions. Okay. You're starting with the presupposition of common ancestry. I'm not. Okay. So our conclusion is going to be different because of that.
I see. So you are drawing the I'm not necessarily drawing the conclusion or the presupposition that there's common ancestry here. It is just going to be the most likely case because these two species are more closely related to each other than they are to any other species that are in the face of the planet. I don't know what other explanation we'd have for how these two organisms came about, other than that they did share a common ancestor, if they share so much genetically. But
Okay.
sure.
Well, in like I said, I have a differing opinion. I believe,
Okay.
it's not a
Gotcha.
problem
Okay,
for,
that's fine. But we'll
yeah.
start there. So you're contending that the bush dog and the Maine wolf likely had separate ancestry, and that they were, or some ancestor to both of them were formed de novo.
Well, I'm not going to make a conclusion
Okay.
about that. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm still open on that. Okay.
Right.
But what I mean is that your frame of reference is based on universal common ancestry.
It's not based on universal common ancestry. It's just based on the fact that things that are most similar to each other genetically must have shared a common ancestor. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And
Mhm.
but that comes from your presupposition, right? That
Sure. Yeah,
yep.
well, I don't know if it comes from a presupposition of that. It just comes from direct observation that things, animals that are more closely related to each other, share more genetically, and that the more recent that common ancestor was, the more likely they are to share uh, um, common genomes. Yeah,
Okay.
right. Now, that doesn't
Well,
assume necessarily that, say, dogs share a common ancestry, say, with bears, or the seals, or say meerkats, or that kind of thing.
okay, when I talk about the presupposition of common ancestry, I'm specifically I'm specifically saying the presupposition of universal common
Oh,
ancestry.
yeah, and I don't think we have to have that built into this. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it is fundamental, but
Okay. I
let me
disagree, but
finish.
go ahead.
Look, okay,
Yeah.
I don't want to argue about it
That's fine.
until
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. We'll
finish
get to it. We'll get to it.
sharing my
That's fine.
stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll talk
That's
you
fine.
can do your
Yep.
pushback after. Okay.
No problem. No problem.
So this is why I do not accept what you brought as evidence for evolution. Now, I can't rule it out. So what I'm saying is it might be evidence for evolution and it might not be. I can't rule it out, but I'm not going to give it credit as evidence for evolution when there are other options. So I would say this is entirely based on the assumption of common ancestry, number one. Number two is I could easily turn this around and make it evidence against the common ancestry of the Maine wolf and bush dog. Okay. And here's how I would do that. I would say, you say that these private alleles are evidence of their evolution. And I could say these private alleles are evidence that they don't have a common ancestor. And in addition to them not being able to interbreed. Okay. So I could turn it around and use the same evidence and say they don't have a common ancestor based on this. Okay. So if we can use the evidence in either way, we can't really say
Gotcha.
it is evidence in one direction.
Just so I understand what you're saying, um, the fact that they can't interbreed, you're saying that that's one line of evidence that they don't share common ancestry.
It's one line of evidence, and I'm
Okay.
not saying it's conclusive. Like, I haven't come to a conclusive position on this, and
I
I'm
see.
not ruling out your evidence,
Right.
as evidence of evolution. I'm just not
Right.
granting it as positive evidence. I can't rule it out.
I'm unaware of any data showing that bush dogs and Maine wolves are able to interbreed. But if that were to be shown, then would you I'll
That
draw
would
the
be an
feature.
uptick. That would be an uptick in my confidence that they share a common ancestor.
Would it like eliminate any doubt whatsoever, or
No, it wouldn't. I mean, it wouldn't eliminate any doubt, but it would give me a strong reason to
okay,
accept that.
okay,
Okay.
all right.
All right. So, but number three, I could also say that the maned wolf and bush dog are an example of convergent evolution. Okay. Would you have a problem with me saying that they're an example of convergent evolution?
Uh, yeah, kind of.
Okay. Yeah. Why does that bother you?
I mean, okay, because I see one that they have very similar overall genomes. That indicates that they did share a common ancestor, a relatively recent common ancestor. Not super recent. We know of other divergence times for the other canid species that is even more recent than that, but on the order of around, I think it's something like 3 million years. We'll get into the data when I pull up my slides. But both of them are more similar to each other than they are to any other canid. That's an indication that they did share a common ancestor. The any sort of divergence in their overall morphology would be an indication that that's not convergent evolution. I mean, convergent evolution is going to be those things of disparate related organisms that had divergence times that are longer than what we would call for the bush dog and the Maine wolf, where they are sharing some common morphological features due to environmental selection pressure.
Okay, would you call it then would you be more comfortable if I said it was parallel evolution?
I would also disagree with that just because of the radical different morphologies of these two organisms, right? They share more in common genetically than they do with any other canid, any other species on the face of the planet. Yet they show radical differences in their overall morphology and in their habitat and also their behavior and in their diet. So I see
Well,
a lot of divergence that has occurred, likely due to major differences in the kinds of environments where the two populations probably separated some 2.5 million years ago. They ended up in very different kinds of environments, and therefore they were facing very different selection pressures, which resulted in the differences in the morphology, behavior, diet of these organisms. That would
okay.
be the argument that I would make. I don't see a whole but I'm open to the idea that you think that this is an excellent example of conversion evolution.
No, I don't. Look,
It's fine. I mean,
I'm
that
I'm
sounds like
only
what you're saying, but
suggesting. No, 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 no,
okay.
no.
All
I'm
right.
what I'm trying to do actually with this point is point out the hypocrisy in the theory of evolution, okay, and
Oh,
the contradictions that people are not willing to admit to. So if
I
that
don't see
rubs
that at
against
all,
you,
but
I know you don't, but
yeah.
look,
I
in
don't actually
various
understand the argument you're making. How is
okay,
this an example of convergent evolution?
now, I'm saying I could supply that.
Yeah,
And or
please.
I could say no, what I'm saying is look, I could make the argument as is made in many places on phylogenetic trees that this is an example of convergent evolution, or maybe in this case it would be more like parallel evolution because you said, well, it's based on the environment. So maybe it would be more of an example of parallel evolution. But this is what is so this is what is done over and over again in the theory of evolution. So you're not comfortable with it when it rubs up against your evidence, but this is what is done when they can't make sense of the phylogenetic tree. Okay, let's
I'll
move
let
on.
you
We
keep
can argue
going,
about
but
that
I
point. We're going
totally
to
disagree
argue.
with
We
that.
can argue that point later.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm just so this is why I'm saying like this is why I don't accept it for evolution. Okay, it's entirely based on the assumption of common ancestry. I could easily turn it around and make it against the common ancestry of maned wolf and bush dog. And I could also say that it's convergent evolution or parallel evolution. Now, let's look at just what the paper shows. And I just wanted to show a couple of things from the paper. This is just kind of, I just wanted to, show that the authors of this paper are not asserting that this is definitely innovation by mutation. Okay, they're very conditional in the way that they say it. It may have been enabled by variants in genes associated, and it may underlie. So they're very conditional about the way they present it, and I appreciated that. So you know, basically one of the things that I noticed, though, is that they said we found signals of positive selection in both coding and regulatory region in bush dogs and Maine wolves, which are the most disparate species concerning ecology and morphology, despite having shared a common ancestor only 3.1 million years ago. Okay, more on the 3.1 million years ago in a minute, but basically, and I know this isn't contradicting anything you said, okay, but this is an example to me, as I see with almost every paper I read about evolution, where the tree of life doesn't make sense.
I
So
don't know what you mean by that.
what
Do you
I
have a
mean by
problem with
that
what
is
they?
the genetics don't match up with the morphology. So, we're trying to suppose that everything evolved from a common ancestor, and the things that are more closely related, they actually at one time split off and they were completely alike, right? Like they split off from an ancestor that was the genome was exactly the same, right?
Yeah,
But
there would be some population of a common ancestor for the bush dog and the Maine wolf that lived around 3.1 million years ago. That's what the genetic evidence would indicate. And as I said, I mean, what you're pointing out, what the author is saying here is exactly what I just said, which is
it
that
is.
there's a
But I
there must have been a population that went into separate areas with disparate ecology, therefore resulting in different morphology. Yeah.
Okay, and I have no problem with, variations that can come about with, environmental differences. Okay.
Right. Through the
So
process of natural selection and mutation.
and that part I'm dubious about. Okay.
Okay.
So
So
that's
what
the
would be
part
your
I'm dubious
explanation
about.
for the
That's
origin?
the part I'm dubious about.
Okay, that's
Well, I
fine.
mean, we
That's fine.
talked about it last time. I talked about the lizards that changed even within their own lifetime. They
Yeah.
actually gained a new structure in their
Okay.
digestive system to help them digest plants when they were removed from a carnivorous diet and put in a place that they only could eat plants.
Are you
Okay, and then in
suggesting?
the same,
Mhm.
so I'm suggesting
Are you
big
suggesting if
wolf.
we were to take a bush dog pup and put it into the environment where the Maine wolf lives, that it would all of a sudden look like a Maine wolf?
No, I don't know what would happen. All
Okay.
I'm trying to say is there are other explanations for differences between
That
organisms than
that's
mutation and
not an
natural
explanation for
selection.
this case, but
Okay. Well, now that was a very small point I wanted to make,
okay.
but here's a bigger point because you made a very big deal about how the molecular divergence dates match up with the fossil record. Now, when we talked, I gave you an example that I had just found where the molecular divergence date didn't match up with the fossil record by 40 million years when it was
Okay.
done with the tomatillo. Okay. But you said, oh, but it does match up, basically in the same paper that you gave me. Okay, they're admitting that there is a problem with this. So their findings, based on the molecular sequencing, their findings have a single dispersal of canids into South America between 3.9 and 3.5 million years ago. Okay, so that's what their molecular studies. And then they say, however, this model has been challenged by the presence of North American fossils assigned to the Maine wolf and crab eating fox, lineages from the early Pliocene around 5 million years ago, suggesting that these groups predate the closure of the Panamanian land bridge.
Right. And
Okay.
do you see the next sentence
Yeah. Nonetheless, these fossil remains are fragmentary and correct phylogenetic assignments have
of these
proven difficult.
fossils? Yes.
Right. But so,
Precluding
but
their
the
use as conclusive evidence against a single dispersal model.
okay, well, that's
Right.
that's a choice they're making.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, and
But
the choice that they're making is that one thing that's really complicated about trying to determine phylogeny amongst the canids is that we do have a lot of fossils to work with. But I think that what this paper is particularly informative of is that and they're not the first to show this, but there definitely is a universal common ancestry for the South American canids. That they all share a common ancestor. That there was this dispersal event that occurred probably around 3.5 million years ago that is consistent with the Great American Interchange that we know happened geologically. That the fossil evidence, though, had up to basically molecular dating and genetic comparative analyses, was kind of a mix of and a mess, and it didn't comport with a lot of the molecular data. And that's because I think that what this paper shows is that you can get the evolution of novelty, which is going to make it somewhat difficult to create phylogenetic trees strictly on fossil evidence alone. And that, especially if you're talking about recent common ancestry of organisms that have diverged relatively recently, you can use ancient genomes, but you can also then use the molecular dating to show like the actual relationships and the divergence times quite accurately.
Well, you're saying quite accurately, but I already gave
Right.
you one example where it wasn't accurate, and
Yeah,
and
from
and
fossil evidence, which again, that could have just been convergent evolution of some sort of tomatillo species 40 million years ago. I don't know that study whatsoever, but what we're talking about here are the canids, and I think you're bringing up a plant species that really doesn't actually reflect anything upon what we're talking about here.
okay, but see how quick you
Right.
were to call upon convergent evolution when you needed it
Sure.
to match up with your fossil and molecular dates?
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you weren't comfortable with me doing that for the canids.
Well,
But like
I still
so
don't understand what you mean about the bush dog and the Maine wolf being an example of convergent evolution. It doesn't make any
I
sense to
didn't
me.
say they necessarily are.
Right.
I
And no
and
one argues that they are.
I'm not even
Yeah.
proposing that because I
But
don't
that was
believe
one
in
of your 3
convergent
major
evolution.
points, is that one could easily argue that this is an
Yeah,
example of convergent evolution
or parallel evolution.
or
Look,
parallel evolution. That doesn't
it
make any sense to
it
me.
but the point is, and
Uh-huh.
I don't believe in convergent evolution, parallel evolution, all these words that you guys make up to
But
fill the
these aren't
holes
made
in
up.
your
These are actual documented concepts that describe the pattern of evidence that we see when we look at a variety of lines of evidence.
Actually, what they're used to do is patch holes, which is exactly the way that
That's
you
not true.
used it. Wait, hold on. That's
Okay.
exactly the way that you used it with the tomatillo. When you were
Sure.
confronted with the difference between the molecular divergent state and what the fossil said about the tomatillo, you said this could be an incident of convergent evolution. So
Convergent
you
evolution,
used it
yes.
to fix a
Right.
contradiction.
How do you know
Okay.
that the fossil tomatillo was truly a tomatillo? How do you know that?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
The look of
Well,
it.
I don't know either.
Okay.
Like, but you're
So
saying that whatever that
I'm
fossil
telling
was
you what
is
the article
definitely the
said.
tomatillo that we have today. Is that what you're
I'm
saying?
telling you what the article said, okay?
Okay. All right.
All right. So,
Okay.
I
I
mean,
haven't read that article anyway.
okay.
So. Okay.
Now, now I think the final point, I mean, their final points, adaptations, they admit that these unique adaptations are still a mystery. So they're not concluding, again, we already talked about that. They're not concluding that this is innovation by mutation. Okay. Second of all, I mean, look, they say here that a decrease in the expression of MSX1 potentially has dual phenotypic effect in the bush dog, specifically a loss of molars in tooth development and interdigital web formation. Now, this is an example of losing something or not using something that is in place, and that's another one of the mechanisms that I would say produces variation, right?
Sure.
The expression, the promotion, the enhancement of certain genes, and not using other genes. And so this is not there's lots of room for variation in morphology that's not based on mutation. Okay, and this shows one example. If this is, if they find that this is true, then this would be an example in, this is not an example of the type of thing that we need to show. The direction that evolution needs to go is gaining genetic information, right? Because at some point, you can't just move the genes around. You actually have to get genetic information for new organs and new systems. Okay, so this would be moving in the wrong direction for evolution. Okay. Be just a mixing up of what's already there. Okay. Now, again, they said it's not yet confirmed by experimental data. And I think you admitted that. And so basically, those are my conclusions. I think that all of this, I mean, do you admit that your molecular divergent states are completely based on your assumption of universal common ancestry?
No.
Okay. Please explain to me why that's not true.
You don't have to assume universal common ancestry of all organisms on the face of the planet to draw a conclusion that if you were looking at two organisms that must have shared some common ancestor at some point are going to be more genetically related to each other than those two organisms compared to a third organism that had a more distant common ancestor. And this can be true for, see, comparing myself to, say, my distant relatives that must be living in Sweden, right? We talked about this, that I, genetically am more similar to people from Sweden, also it turns out German ancestry, than I am to people from, say, that are of native stock from, say, China, right? And but that I might be more similar to, say, people from China than I am to, say, certain populations in Africa. And you can create a phylogeny of human ancestry based on that genetic relatedness, right?
Yes.
And we can create that.
Yeah.
We can
And
do the
that's
same thing for
because we're
dogs. Would you agree
yeah.
with that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So
Domestic
within
dogs.
dogs, we can
Yes.
do that. Okay. So we can also, so, all right. So I have some slides. Do you mind if I share?
Oh, yeah, yeah. But
Right.
first, wait, I want to
Yeah.
clear up. Do
Yeah.
you think, like, do you understand before you go on to a different topic? Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Oh,
you heard
sorry, go
you're
ahead.
going on to a different topic, or we're still doing the same topic? Because
We're
I want to
definitely talking about
know,
the same topic.
do you understand why I have not accepted your evidence, your maned wolf bush dog evidence for evolution?
I do understand it. You believe that there isn't sufficient evidence to indicate that the bush dog and the Maine wolf share a common ancestor.
Yes.
Yes, right. That therefore, obviously, if that isn't the case, that they must have had a more that separate ancestry is the alternative explanation to that.
And yes,
And
and
that they were, I mean, they didn't evolve, right? You would then say that they were specially created if they don't share a common ancestor.
right, yeah.
Even though these
Yes.
two species are more similar to each other than either of them are to any other species on the face of the planet.
Yes. That's not a
And that they
problem from
nest together amongst the other South
that's
American canids.
that's not a problem at all.
Okay. Why is
But
that not a problem?
well, we already talked about this. Your problem
Right.
with it is your idea about what God would do and wouldn't do.
No,
And
no,
I
I'm not
said
talking
that's
about
a
God.
religious
Yeah.
question, right?
Right, right.
That
I didn't
exposes that
mention
you're
God once.
using religion in your arguments for evolution.
No, I'm not.
You're
What religious argument did I use?
you're saying you're presenting this challenge that these
Right.
have to share a common ancestor, because otherwise, why would God make them so similar?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, what are you saying?
Yes. I am saying that these two species share more genomically with each other than they do than any other species on the
Yes.
face of the planet. And that they also share more genomically, though, together with the other South American canids, and that the entire group of South American canids share more with each other than any of them do with the other canids, and that the entire group of canids share more genomically with each other than they do with, say, bears, and
Okay.
that evidence is an indication of phylogenetic relationships, of family relationships, that similar genomics in this case, especially when we're talking about on the fine scale, two species that share more genetically with each other have to have shared a common ancestor.
Well, that's your
I
assumption.
see that. Now, if we also had evidence, now, because you had already said that uh, if there was evidence of hybridization, right? Like if like they could interbreed, that, like,
Yes.
for instance, dogs and wolves, they can
Yes.
interbreed, and that therefore that is evidence that dogs and wolves shared a common ancestor, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That is
And do
evidence.
you mind if we look at slides, because
Yeah.
I have slides?
But are you finished with the maned wolf bush
No,
dog?
I'm coming back to the
Okay.
main
All
wolf and
right.
the dog.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's an argument that I have to make. So,
Okay.
yeah. So one moment, let me get my slides up.
But you presented that these similarities exist, right?
Oh yeah.
But you're not saying how that relates to why I should believe that that means they shared a common ancestor. Except for the interbreeding,
Right.
which I already accepted.
Yes. Yes. Right. Except like, and I don't know of evidence that bush dogs and Maine wolves can interbreed.
Right.
So that is an issue. But I think we'll
And
come.
when I looked that up, it said it's likely that they can't. They have
Right.
different numbers of
Okay.
chromosomes, and
Yes,
it
that is
doesn't
true.
look like they can interbreed
But
and be fertile.
we'll
Yeah.
get to it. So okay. So as far as dogs and wolves, I mean, just kind of going through this again. You initially last week you were ambivalent about saying if they share a common ancestor. But
And
are
now I'm
you
much more fine with saying that dogs and wolves have a common
okay?
ancestry,
Great.
but
And
not
so that
all the animals on that chart. And I don't know about
that's
coyotes. I
fine.
don't
Yeah,
even
we'll get to
remember if
that.
I
We'll get
looked
to
at
that. We'll
that.
get to that.
Okay.
Let's take it one bit at a time. And so therefore, when we look at a phylogenetic tree of dogs, wolves, other dogs and wolves, that you would be comfortable with us forming a phylogenetic tree of wolves and dogs sharing a node, right? Like this is a node
Yes.
here. Yes, and that is okay that we can have that node. This is the node here, right? And that therefore the population of wolves as we have them today, modern populations of wolves today, and the modern populations of dogs today shared a common ancestor at some point in the past.
Yes, I'm fine with that, and I'm basing it on two things. And
Yes.
it is my basis for that is the fact that their mitochondrial DNA
Oh,
in the section COI5P is very similar. Okay. And that would be a region that wouldn't be affected by sexual reproduction because this is in the mitochondria. So they're not changing in other ways. Basically, this is, they're very similar in that region. So that's one piece of evidence. And then also the interbreeding is another piece of evidence. So that's why I'm comfortable accepting that these have a common ancestor.
so it's specifically one gene in mitochondria that you will accept as evidence of common ancestry?
It's not look, it's not no. I'm telling you why I'm comfortable with this now. I'm not ruling out all other evidence, okay? I'm just
Yeah,
saying this is why I'm comfortable with this because this is what I saw in relation to dogs and wolves. Okay?
but so I encourage you to look at other papers, okay, outside of the creationist literature. You can even look at this paper from now 20 years ago where they look at beyond more than just a single gene in the mitochondria genome in order to compare dog and wolf ancestry. And there are lots of other
Okay,
papers.
that's fine. I mean, look,
Yeah,
I'm not planning to spend a lot of time looking into dogs and wolves, okay? Because like
gotcha.
I told you
Yeah.
from the beginning, this is something that anti-creationists tend to care about and some creationists care
Mhm.
about it. For me, it's not really a consideration. I don't care how God, created various kinds of animals. He said he created them after their kind. I accept that.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, so now that you accept that these two organisms share a common ancestor,
Yes.
do you believe that coyotes also share a common ancestor with wolves and dogs?
I told you already. I did not look at the coyotes, and I'm not going to
Okay.
be able to answer all of these questions. Like you're, I
Coyotes, dogs, and wolves can interbreed, though.
okay. Well, then I'll accept that for now
Okay, so
as
you would accept that
evidence that they have
for
a
now.
common
And that
ancestor.
if we look at the phylogenetic tree of them, that we see dogs and wolves share more in common genomically than they do with the coyote,
Okay,
right?
what's the point?
Yes. Yes. So, but the other thing is that, well, we'll get to it. So we can go with the jackal, right? Same thing. We can create a phylogenetic tree based on genomic evidence that the jackal is the outgroup group when we compare dogs and wolves. The dogs and wolves are more genomically similar to each other than either of them are to the coyote. And the coyote is
Well,
more similar to all three of these two guys than they are to the golden jackal. And we can get interbreeding amongst all four of these species.
okay. If the interbreeding gives me a good reason to accept this as common
Fine.
ancestry, but you're starting to make me uncomfortable because you're trying to push the limits of what I actually looked into. Okay. And
Fine.
I did
Okay.
not
I
look
mean,
at
look,
all of these different organisms.
It's
I told you I
for the
found evidence
audience
that the
is
fox,
sure.
okay,
It's at
is
least for
not
the audience's benefit that we
okay.
can discuss these things. Yes. Okay. All right. So this is the phylogenetic tree for those organisms we were just talking about, minus the jackal. So this is from 2010. Genome-wide SNP and haplotype analyses reveal a rich history underlying dog domestication. This is published in Nature. Okay. And this is the phylogenetic tree. So you're mostly focusing on the different breeds that we have breeds that
Okay.
fall into these different categories. and that there's a phylogeny that largely fits with like what kind of category they're put into, although it's not exactly perfect, especially when you get into
Right.
the ancient breeds, because there was some origination events. This is all wolves here. This is the blue. This is wolf phylogeny, and here's coyote as an outgroup relative to the wolves and the rest of the dogs. The Bazinji is also somewhat unique in that it was like probably an early divergence from the rest of the modern dog breeds. But this is all the modern dog breeds and the basic phylogeny. And you would accept that we could adopt this phylogeny as evidence that they share a common ancestry. Like you would
Yes.
be okay with this.
Well, not as evidence, but this is a way of grouping things
Oh, yes,
together.
of
Okay.
based
Yeah.
on the like this is based on years of work comparing the genomic sequences of
Right.
individuals within these breeds and coming up with a phylogeny that largely matches like exactly what we would think that many of these organisms have different very dogs of course are quite varied in their overall appearance
Yes.
and the kinds of behaviors that they do, yet they all share a common ancestor.
Yeah.
Right, okay, and you're perfectly comfortable with that.
I'm perfectly
And
comfortable
and
with
it's
that.
not that, like, say, if you take a pug, and then if you try to raise it as, like, a greyhound, that somehow you can turn that pug into a greyhound. There's something about its genetics that causes
Right.
it to have pug appearance, and it's
It
not greyhound appearance.
it's probably lost a lot of the original the genetic variation that its ancestors had, right? So
Okay.
it's been funneled
Yes.
into a certain population group and it's not coming back.
Right. Okay. Alright. So,
Again, that's an
yes.
example of evolution working in the direction of taking away genetic information rather than building up genetic
Oh, we'll
information.
get to that.
So, okay.
Alright. So, this is a recent paper. I put a link to this or recommended one of your commenters to look at this. This is published just in the last couple of months, looking at mutation rates in dogs, 43 different dog breeds with extended phenotypes. So they looked at over 500 different dogs, sequencing the entire genome of all the dogs, every dog that was in that. So they basically had
Right.
phylogenies of little family trees within each breed. And then they could look for mutation rates. So they knew who the parents were, they knew who the offspring were, and they could identify de novo mutations. And this is a way, and now that we have next gen sequencing, it's going to become easier and easier for us to really truly calculate out mutation rates, right? Because a lot of it was based on largely estimates more than anything else. But we can actually calculate out the de novo mutation rates. And as you can see, this is the mutation rate here for all these different breeds. They also, although they included even the Beningi, which is that unique outgroup of the modern dog breeds. That's an Asian group, and they're all basically the same. So it's not like mutation rate varies much across dog breeds. Do you agree with that?
Well, based on what you're showing me, it looks like that's true.
Gotcha. Okay. And then this is their workflow for identifying those de novo mutation rates. This table I wanted to show to you because I also think that this is really important. So, with given that you accept that like dogs and wolves, dogs and coyotes, jackals share a common ancestor, when you use these mutation rates to assess when the last common ancestor for these different splits occurred, this is what you come up with. So within the Western Asian dog group, it's probably around 5,000 years ago when that group emerged, the East Asian and Western Asian dog group. So West Eurasian dogs and East Asian dogs probably split somewhere around 5,000 years ago. Mexican wolves and Yellowstone wolves probably split around 11,000 years ago. And as I said, the Basenji is that unique outgroup from all the other modern dog species. Estimates show that that divergence time must have been about 17,000 years ago, based on the mutation rates that they analyzed in this study. European wolves and East Asian wolves, they're distinct groups as well. They must have diverged around 27,000 years ago. And that the divergent times for dogs and wolves had to have occurred around 28,000 years ago, around 30,000 years ago. And that the divergence times between coyotes and wolves would have had to have occurred 135,000 years ago. And that the divergence time between jackals and wolves would have had to have occurred around 800,000 years ago. Are you comfortable with accepting those data?
Well, okay, first, let's just make sure. I just want to do a check.
Yeah,
Are we basing the mutation rates on pedigree studies or phylogenetic study? Like
this is
based
based
on
on pedigree studies.
only pedigree. Okay, then I'm fine with it.
Okay,
But
so you
so
accept that the last common ancestor for wolves and jackals was 814,000 years ago.
if we were only going to consider mutations, sure. But
Okay.
you're talking about looking at mutation rates, but
Yes.
that's not the only thing that brings genetic variation between dogs, right? I mean, we have
That's a separate question.
it's not a separate question
Yeah.
because you're talking about how did we get all these differences with dogs, right? And so I'm saying, look, there's lots of ways that you can get genetic variation. So in ways that could happen very quickly. So I'm not going to base this on just the mutation rate and then work that backward because the variation could have come in a variety of ways
What
that
would
you
have
I
that
know
been?
you accept, like genetic drift, gene flow. We talked about the little pug that looks different and is not going to get back to the Great Dane. How does that happen? Selective breeding and isolation, right? So there's lots of different ways that dogs can diverge. We're not only we do pay attention to mutations, but that's not the only thing causing changes within
I
dogs.
agree with that, but do you think
Okay.
pugs and I agree with that, some of that. It's a lot of that I disagree with. Do you think that pugs and Great Danes share more genetically than, say, a pug or a Great Dane does with, say, a coyote?
Okay. I have no idea. I've never examined this. And I'm so
They
why don't
do,
you tell
though.
me? Why don't
They
you tell
do.
me?
Yes.
Okay.
So they are extraordinarily similar. Like they're dogs, right? Even though they
Okay.
look extraordinarily different from each other, they share much, much more in common genetically than either of them do to a wolf or especially to a coyote or a jackal. Okay.
Yes.
So
And
like
are
they're
you
almost
saying
identical. You
that
would have a hard
variation?
time looking genetically. Like if you had the entire genome of a pug and the entire genome of a Great Dane, and then you had the entire genome of a coyote, the pug and the Great Dane would look almost identical compared to the coyote.
Okay, cool. Thanks for
Right.
enlightening me on that. Now,
Great.
what is the
Yes.
point?
The point is that these mutation rates clearly show that the divergence time for wolves and coyotes and wolves and jackals had to have been on the order of hundreds of thousands of years ago in order for them to have shared a common ancestor. You already
Are
agree that they
you
share a common
saying,
ancestor.
hold on, I know, I
Yeah.
already agreed,
Yes.
but are you saying to me the only mechanism that you accept for change is mutation and natural selection?
For introductions of new changes within the genome, yeah, it's going to be mutation. Yes.
Okay,
Now you can
that
get
is your
change in
problem. That's
allele
the problem.
frequency due to
That
genetic. Okay, so sure. What do
that's
you
the
think?
problem
Right.
because
So
you
what
have
is an
lots of
additional source for genetic variation?
you have reproduction, you have
That
okay,
doesn't introduce mutations.
I'm not limiting myself to mutations. I'm saying the genetic variation that you're looking at between dogs and wolves has a variety of sources. You're limiting it to mutation. I'm not. I'm 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 saying, look, these are actually these are accepted methods of getting like genetic. So you're going to say selective breeding doesn't bring about certain genetic and
Yeah.
reproduction
No.
and gene flow, genetic
No.
drift. None of these
They do not.
change anything about the genetics of dogs and wolves.
They do. They can alter the kinds of alleles that you have present. Yes. So that will mean that you will say reduce variation, or that you might introduce variation by having gene flow, so that you will have a new variant that comes into a population. That's what gene flow is. That you have new variants that are brought in. A new allele is brought into an existing population, but it's not create. It's not the addition of new variants. It is not the addition of like a mutation.
Okay.
Mutation, variation within the genome can only occur, so that addition of like of a single nucleotide polymorphism, a new nucleotide polymorphism can only come through mutation. An indel can only come through mutation. You can't get those through reproduction. You can't get those through gene flow. You can't get those through genetic drift. All genetic drift and gene flow can do is just alter the overall ratios of the existing alleles and change the, say, homozygosity or heterozygosity within an existing population. Reproduction won't do it. Recombination will then also sort of create new combinations of existing alleles, but the new alleles and the new genetic sequences can only come about through mutation, unless you have another mechanism.
Uh, you're gonna look in. I've already told you what I think about this, which is,
But you're wrong.
there's lots of mechanisms. Well, if I'm wrong, great. I'll be happy to come back on and say I'm
Yes,
wrong.
I'm gonna have to come back on. You're gonna have to look at like sources of how we actually establish these kinds of phylogeny.
Okay, all right. But this is what I'm gonna say.
Yes.
If I have made a rule, okay, that if someone is presenting evidence, they have to bring the evidence. I'm not going to respond to what you're saying here because you're making assertions. You're not showing me why this is correct.
Rebecca, this is the table. This is the evidence. I'm bringing it to you.
What you're showing
me. Do you literally
me,
want me to show you like the actual sequences?
I want you to show me something more about, you're doing this based on mutation rates. I didn't argue with your mutation rate. Okay.
Yes, right.
What I'm arguing is your extrapolation back into the past and assuming that every change came about through mutation. Okay, what are we looking at when we're talking? Are you looking at whole genomes of all these organisms?
Yes.
Are you looking at entire genome?
Entire genome. Okay. Yes.
And you're saying every change that is every different allele for you, that is based on a mutation.
When you have the emergence of a new allele, that has to come through mutation. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
It is the source. If the genetic code is changed, if it is different, so if you have like a common ancestor, right? And if you have an offspring that emerges, and if there are new alleles that we can even go on. Like, so this is one thing that this paper showed is that I thought was kind of neat is that it walks through like the different kinds of new variants, the de novo mutations that they find. So they also compared it to a study with humans, right? So most of them are introns or intergenetic because most of the genome is junk DNA. Now they did find, of course, some changes that happen within, say, downstream or upstream of certain variants or within the coding region. And this is the proportion of what they found if it was within the coding region. So in the dog, what they find is that there are new mutations that they discovered in these like new in the offspring that are largely either synonymous, which means that the mutation was within a codon that probably didn't change the allele in any kind of way, or didn't change the amino acid that is produced. So it is a genetic variant that still produces the same amino acid, and that's referred to as a synonymous variant. But if it's within a gene itself, most of them are going to lead to missense, which means it's going to be a change in the amino acid that is produced because now you have a codon that's producing a new amino acid. But even sometimes they get a stop in the middle of the gene, which means it's a stop codon, which means now you have entirely truncated genes. But of course, these are like dogs that are alive and fine, like they're just dogs. And there's no sense like they hadn't been evaluated for any sort of genetic malady that they have, but they obviously have these new mutations that are discovered because they're not found in the parents, even within coding regions, which I thought was super interesting. But yeah, right. Like,
and I'm not arguing that no mutations accumulate. I already agreed with your. I already agreed that mutations accumulate.
Mutations accumulate, and that over time you're going to get more and more mutations. And if there's been a common ancestor between two groups of organisms, such as like coyotes, wolves, or jackals, that has to mean that there are going to be more and more mutations that get accumulated. And therefore, we can calculate when that last common ancestor existed. And for coyotes and wolves, it was 135,000 years ago. For coyotes, wolves, compared to jackals, that had to have been around 800,000 years ago based on these data.
Okay. Again, I'm not arguing with your mutation rate.
Gotcha.
the thing that we have a fundamental disagreement about,
Right.
and this is what I'm saying, if we can just leave it at a disagreement, unless you want to bring further evidence in the future. Okay. But
Well, okay,
my
the thing that I don't
understanding, and
understand,
I
because
will look,
you agree that the coyotes, wolves, jackals share a common ancestor because they can
yes.
interbreed, and that therefore there must have been a common ancestor. That there was like, I mean, I guess we would say there were probably a male and a female, right? That maybe
Okay,
came
yeah,
off of the
that's a
ark.
problem for you,
Sure.
isn't it? Where did
It's
that
not a
male
problem
and
for me.
female
I
coming from?
wouldn't
Okay,
actually say
all
that,
right.
but because I would think that it would actually come from a population. But you would actually say that that all of these organisms that are shown here in this table have emerged from one male and one female that came off the ark 4,000 years ago. But the number of mutations that we see in the jackal genome relative to the coyote and wolf genome, you would have to have a rate of mutation that is 20 times higher than what we observe. So where did all those mutations come from?
Okay, well, but this is where when you're talking about we have two, right? And they're reproducing. And they both have there's heterozygosity, right? They already have a mixture. And then they're going to reproduce, there's
Yes.
going to be more
But these are
reproduction.
novel mutations that are different between them, between these groups.
And we also have, like I said, the other factors that are going in genetic, drift. We have, okay, so that's fine.
Rebecca,
And,
genetic drift does
and
not introduce mutations. These are, you cannot get that. You cannot use that as an excuse to explain this.
okay,
You are
well,
very
I will
confused
think
on
about
this.
it.
Okay,
Okay,
please do. All right.
yeah, I'll
So,
think about
but
it. But my
it's going to get worse. I'm
understanding is
sorry.
there's a lot. It's going to get rid.
Yeah, it's going to
All
get
right.
worse. So, because,
Okay. Well, I mean, and
so
that's fine because what you're
yes,
doing right now actually
yes.
is you're presenting evidence
Yeah.
against young Earth creation. Okay,
Oh, no,
which
I'm presenting evidence
you're
in
not
favor of
presenting
common
evidence in favor
ancestry.
of evolution.
No,
Okay,
this is
but
definitely evidence
that's
in
fine.
favor of common ancestry.
But
Sure, I also think that it strongly debunks the young Earth creationist model. Definitely. I mean, obviously, it's fully inconsistent with the young Earth creationist model, and that I think when you look at any phylogeny with any group of organisms for which creationists accept share common ancestry, you're going to run into this problem over and over again. It's not just dogs; it's really all groups of kinds. Every single group of kinds are going to run into the same problem where if you start to look at the relationship of different species that you're going to run into this. So let's go back
but I mean, look,
the to what we originally were talking
even in
about.
the paper that we were looking at,
Yeah.
okay,
Well,
good.
let's
We're
get
going
to
to
it.
go back
Yeah.
to that, fine.
Yes.
But remember, they're even talking about, oh, this decreased in, this got promoted, and basically like talking about the different mechanisms that can provide for variation, right? And so there's no problem with losing things and, even changes, right? But so I'm not arguing that mutations happen, but what I'm saying is I don't see evidence that they cause new systems, new organs to develop in the way that evolutionists say that they do.
You were saying that the morphological novelty, the behavioral novelty, the disparate diets that we see in the bush dog and the Maine wolf, that couldn't have arisen through natural processes.
No, I'm not saying that because I don't look. I, I'm saying there's possibilities within that. Okay, but
Uh-huh.
I've already given my reasons, and I said I can't make an absolute conclusion about this based on this paper or what we know in general.
Gotcha.
I've already given my reasons, so I won't go back over that.
Right. So let's go back to this paper. So I told you I would get it back to this. So this is the phylogenetic tree that these authors generate. There's a bunch of information that's built within the way that they drew this. Some of it's interesting. I also think it sort of makes it somewhat confusing. But essentially, here's the tree, and then based on the a conventional mutation rate, I will say that the mutation rate that we were just talking about in that new study of 43 pedigrees of dogs really wasn't any different than the mutation rate that was already being used. That's why you didn't see a whole lot of change in the calibration of the divergence times within wolves and jackals and dogs. This is generally, so basically they just confirmed exactly what everyone had already determined. They just did it in a little bit more of a thorough way. So this study compared genomes of the South American canids. So they did sequencing for the South American canids. And so then this is the phylogeny that they find here, right? There's a big group of what are called the South American foxes. There are a bunch of different foxes here. They're not related to the foxes. This is one of the things about when we were trying to develop canid phylogenies based on morphology back 50, 60 years ago, before we had molecular evidence. People would look at the South American canids and they'd be like, I don't know, it kind of looks like a fox. Let's put it in the fox group. Well, it does have some differences from like actual foxes, like the red fox and foxes in Europe, but they look like foxes. So I guess we're just going to call them foxes. And that's where like there can be these confusing phylogenies if you look at really old data based on overall morphology and fossil evidence prior to having any molecular data. The molecular data, once we started to be able to sequence these things 20, 30 years ago, fully showed that the South American canid group is an entirely monophyletic group, that they are all related to each other. They are more similar to each other genetically than any of them are to the other canids, including coyotes, wolves, jackals, the gray foxes, the outgroup here. Because now what we seem to think is that there's probably like a fox group. In fact, I can go to this, right? There's a fox group, and then there's this other grouping here of wolf-like animals, including all the South American foxes. And that within the South American canid group, there is a monophyletic group of these South American foxes, along with the Maine wolf and the bush dog. Okay. So basically restating a lot of what you just said, and prior to that. Now, the divergence times is the other important thing here, right? As you pointed out, these authors said that the last common ancestor for the bush dog and the Maine wolf had to have been around 3.1 million years ago. And that's shown here, right? This is the node at 3.1 million years ago. They also determined that the last common ancestor for the bush dog, the Maine wolf, and the rest of South American foxes must have been around 3.5 million years ago, which is fully consistent with the Great American Interchange. The Great American Interchange probably started. This is when the South American continent collided with the North American continent around 3.5 million years ago. The hypothesis is that then there were like wolf-like ancestors that moved their way into South America where there were no other canids to compete against, and they went into all these different environments within South America. They forced a bunch of other sort of predator-like organisms to go extinct, such as a really unusual marsupial carnivore-like animal that was living in South America. That went extinct. Others went extinct. Dogs and dog-like animals are really good at what they do. They were able to move into South America and just take over all these different available niches, including interesting divergence that happened between the bush dog and the Maine wolf, and that they ended up in very different environments and ended up facing different natural selection pressures, evolving different unique features. Okay, that's what the evidence would show. Now, I get that you would say that the bush dog and the Maine wolf would have separate common ancestry. As we talked about last time, we were already looking at the private allele data, and then this is one of the figures that they have in that study that we've been talking about, where they show like just evidence of like this. These are obviously just figures indicating a mechanism that would involve some of the private alleles that they find that are unique to the Maine wolf and the bush dog, that would allow for them to have stubby legs and the Maine wolf to have some very long legs based on various mechanisms. And as you said, there's a lot of mays, there's a lot of mites, because we need to do further experimentation to see if this is truly indeed the case. The other evidence that they show is that there's some unique private alleles within the Maine wolf that allows it to metabolize the kinds of dietary benefits that they would get from eating the wolf apple, which is something that they specialize on, since the Maine wolf depends upon 50% of its calories from fruit. It eats fruit.
Okay, you're just representing everything we already talked about. So
I'm getting to it.
What's the point?
So let's talk about. I want to talk a little bit more about evolutionary novelty. So, within dogs, we know that they have. So this is a paper published in 2013, where they describe the fact that the pancreatic amylase gene, AMY2B, is there's been a duplication within dogs relative to wolves, and that's shown here. So red is dogs, blue is wolves, and they looked at a number of individuals of either dogs or wolves, and they looked for the number of copies of the amyloid this amylase gene that within the wolf genome of these dogs or within the dog genome within these dogs. And amylase is really interesting because it is the first step in the digestion of starch to glucose in the small intestine. And this allows for the catalyzation and breakdown of starch so that it can be turned into things that animals could then use as energy. Now, both organisms have the same gene, but there's been this duplication that has occurred within dogs,
Okay.
right? So wolves have just basically one copy, but within the genome, and this is what this is indicating, is that within, because the orange dots are the dogs, from what I understand, there's been strong selection pressure to have a duplication that's occurred. This now leads to a greater expression of amylase and allows for amylase activity to be about tenfold higher in dogs than wolves. Now, this is coincident with dog uh, evolution alongside human beings and their domestication. This is another paper. Oh, I forgot to include the link to this paper. Yeah, I didn't include the link, or the citation for this. I'll have to send that to you later because this is a super interesting paper. So basically, they looked at the ancient genomes of a bunch of different dog fossils, and they looked to see how many copies of the amylase gene did they have, and they find basically a transition of an increase in the number of amylase genes. That's what we're seeing on the y-axis here. So this is amylase copy number. This is
Okay.
wolves here. Here's the other canids. You can see they all just have two, right? It's on either one set of chromosome or the other set. And then here are modern dogs up here, right? They've got 6 or 8 or so. What you can see is that many of the ancient genomes of the dogs, prior to the onset of massive development of agricultural technology within humans, largely had around 2 amylase copies. But by duplicating it, they were able to get evolutionary novelty. So these, there must have been some ancestor of the dogs that had a duplication event that occurred for the amylase gene. It got copied a number of times, and that allowed for greater amylase expression so that it can then use the kinds of foods that humans are able to produce. And we do know that dogs can actually eat the kinds of foods that humans can eat, and they're not so dependent upon meat products like wolves are. And that this is fully an explanation for how this occurred, right? And that obviously this is then the selection that was driven this. Now, this is artificial selection. Humans are largely doing this. But of course, I'm not claiming that the humans 6,000, 8,000 years ago were in some sort of genetic lab and they were trying to duplicate the amylase gene. This is just something that happened through mutation. Would you agree with that?
Well, now we get into talking about, was there it in this is something we didn't really discuss,
Yeah.
but we need to talk about, like, there's different types of mutations, and some seem to be adaptive, some seem to be directed toward a point, right? Like, so a
Directed.
gene
Now, what do you
duplicate
mean by that?
directed, I mean, like, through various things within the cells within the genome, there's, promotions and enhancements. And so, like, basically, like, there's the, gene regulatory network that's causing some things to be expressed, right? So,
Yeah,
and
but that's not what's happening
duplication to
here,
occur.
right?
Okay,
This is
how do you
this
know
is
what's happening here?
okay. Because
What
what
do
is
you
happening
propose?
here.
What is your conclusion about
Sure.
this?
What I'm saying that is because that's now what you're describing has nothing to do with this. This is an increase in the copy number within the genome, and we're getting
Right.
greater expression because the number of genes got duplicated, and the number of genes that you have of one particular gene can actually increase overall expression. So dogs have higher expression of amylase simply because they have more copies.
And when you do this, so based on your mutation rates and your
Yeah,
comparison of the genomes,
yeah.
when a gene is duplicated, does that count as one mutation or as 1,000 or
Well,
however
so I'm
much the
not a
gene is?
geneticist, so I don't know precisely how they would
Okay.
determine
Well, I
that.
mean, that's important, right? Because that would
Sure. Yeah,
greatly up your timeline if you're counting an entire gene
sure.
duplication,
Now I
which could
think
be thousands
right.
of base
I
pairs. And
yes.
so, right, and you're counting
I
that
don't
as,
think that a gene
yeah.
duplication counts as like a wait. So the the kinds of data that we were looking at before, were looking at single nucleotide polymorphisms. So they're looking for or indels. So either one or the other. So small changes to the genome that come at a regular pace. Now, major duplication events also occur. We do know that that happens. It happens within humans all the time. Like even within an individual, you can find even entire chromosomes. For instance, there are people who carry like trisomy, like an extra chromosome in just a part of their body because an entire chromosome just got carried along and that just gets duplicated. Like that can happen. You get chimeras even within individuals because the biology is actually really super messy and it's not like a really well functioning efficient machine at all. Um, right. That's just absolutely the case. Yeah.
The lack of awe is just astounding.
Oh, I'm
Like
awed by it. I think it's
right now,
amazing that
we
natural processes can result in things that get duplicated, which now humans can take advantage of when they are trying to artificially select the ancient dogs, right, that occurred around 8,000 years ago when they were living side by humans. As humans are developing agriculture, obviously it's better and easier for them to be able to have a wider variety of foods that they can feed their dogs. So dogs can eat starch-based diets. And therefore, they can use their agriculture products to feed their dogs instead of having to go out and kill meat and give them the high quality meat.
Okay, so are
Yeah.
you saying this happened because they were like was there
No.
it
Yeah.
just happened randomly, like
Yes. There was a
randomly this
variant that
happened?
occurred that there was a
Mhm.
duplication. We know this happens. It happens in every individual. I just
I
showed you a paper of
I'm not
the numbers
arguing
of
that
mutations that you
duplication
can get
happens.
in one offspring relative to parents. That it's on the order of hundreds. Like
I
one
agree
parent
with
is going
that.
to one offspring is going to have hundreds of mutations relative to its parent.
I agree with that, and I would say that's not a good thing for our
Oh, okay.
offspring,
Sure.
right? That's
No,
gonna be
that's
a
totally not
problem
true.
later on, right? Because
Why would
we're
that be a problem?
collecting more and more mutations, and that's more and more genetic diseases, so
But in
we're
this case, what you're seeing
declining.
is that there's a
Okay.
duplication event that actually allows them to have a greater variety in their diet.
Right, and my understanding is that depending on our environment can actually cause certain things to happen within our genome, such as a duplication event and a change that allows for you to do a certain thing that you couldn't do before.
I
And
don't know of any mechanism
I gave the
that
example.
where the environment could cause this kind of mutation.
Okay, I'll give you an example. How about Linsky's experiment with the E. coli, where
I'm
the
not
E.
aware
coli
of what you're talking about.
Okay. So, the long running evolution experiment where E. coli, basically was being reproduced in the lab. I think we're at
Sure.
70,000 generations now, maybe more. But basically, one thing that happened that was first hailed as like a great, like, proof that evolution has the power to innovate and mutations have the power to innovate. Okay. So, was that a certain batch of the E. coli developed the ability to metabolize citrate in an aerobic environment. Okay, that was
Okay.
an ability that they didn't have when the experiment started. Okay, but
Right.
it they were able to metabolize citrate. And at first, this was said to be this is amazing. See, they developed a new function. This is exactly what we need to show that mutations can do these, great innovative things and give new functions to organisms. But then the experiment was repeated several times. And Scott Minnick and his team showed that they could actually make this happen. They could induce this over and over again. So they could take E. coli and put it in that environment, and it very quickly, in a matter of a few, generations, it would metabolize. It would gain the ability to metabolize citrate. So it was a gene duplication plus some kind of change that was made, and it would happen over and over again. So that gives you a clue that it's not random. Because if it was random, we wouldn't see the same thing happen repeatedly. That gives you a clue that something is happening that is not random, that's actually intentional at some level in the cell's interworkings. That it somehow there's an ability to adapt to the environment that's not random. It's based on the environmental need. So that's an example.
I okay, so I my understanding of that experiment is that they did not adequately demonstrate it. It's the environment that was causing the mutation in that case.
Well, I told you it turned out that it was gene duplication plus some
Sure.
other change in the
Right.
genome, but that
So,
it
but
would
I'm trying to
happen
I'm
repeatedly.
asking
It would
you
happen
here,
repeatedly.
how did the environment lead to the amylase gene here being duplicated in dogs?
Well, I'm not going to be able to explain that. Okay. You're the one
Yeah, that doesn't make any
presenting
sense to
evidence.
me.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is there's other options than just random mutation plus natural
Well,
selection.
what's the
There
option
are
here?
the option here could be, and I'm not saying it is, but
Yes.
it could be that in response to the environment, the you know genes, the regulatory at whatever level they're at whatever level of ability, and I don't know where that level exists. But so what I'm saying is, I don't know where the intention exists, okay, or the knowledge comes from. But
Mhm.
there is an an ability to adapt to the environment based on needs.
Okay. I don't know how the change in environment in ancient agricultural societies led caused the gene to be duplicated.
Well, I'm not I can't tell you that, but I
Yeah,
can
that
tell
doesn't make
you that
sense to me.
we've noticed, we've observed that happening, and I gave you the E. coli experiment.
Right,
So
but we're
we
talking
know
about
that this can
dogs, and I don't
happen. I know.
understand
We
how
know that
that.
this can happen.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. So we'll put a pin in that. But I
Okay.
wanted to talk about this issue of interbreeding. So the thing is, as I mentioned, I'm unaware of a interbreeding event between bush dogs and Maine wolves. I don't know of any evidence that that's the case. But there is a
Okay.
study published in 2023 of a hybridization event that seemed to have occurred in 2021. And so they found this weird, unusual animal that didn't seem to share any of the kinds of morphological traits of the known existing canids that live within this area of Brazil. What they did then is that they thought that, okay, they hypothesized that this is probably a hybrid of some kind because it seemed to share some traits of some organisms, but maybe not all. And there are really only four organisms that it could be a hybrid of. One possibility is that it could be a hybrid of the crab-eating fox and the pampas fox. Now, there because canids actually vary in their number of chromosomes quite a bit, there's the possibility of looking at chromosome number as a way of determining what is the potential hybrid. So the crab-eating fox and the pampas fox, they both have 74 chromosomes. So therefore, a hybrid of these two species would expect it to have 74 chromosomes. The other possibility is that you could potentially have the Maine wolf um, being hybridized with the crab-eating fox. So this is another one of these South American foxes. And the Maine wolf has 76 chromosomes. The crab-eating fox has 74 chromosomes. Therefore, the hybrid would be expected to have 75 chromosomes. Of course, you could also have a Maine wolf that hybridized with the Pampas fox. Again, Maine wolf has 76 chromosomes. The Pampas fox has 74 chromosomes. Therefore, the hybrid would be expected to have 75 chromosomes. Now, an alternative is that because there are all kinds of dogs that live, wild dogs that live throughout South America now, because human beings have brought them into them more recently. It could be that maybe a Maine wolf bred with a dog, and that therefore, in this case, because dogs have 78 chromosomes and the Maine wolf has 76 chromosomes, here you would expect the number of chromosomes to be 77, and that therefore but it also could have maybe interbred with a crab eating fox, um, or potentially a pampas fox, which would mean that it would have 76 chromosomes. So three of these are South American canids, and then one is a dog that is descended from wolves, which are largely they're restricted to North America and Europe, except now we have all kinds of dogs that live here, right? So okay, potentially it could be a South American interbreeding between the Maine wolf and these other two foxes, or it might even be a hybridization that has occurred, an interbreeding that occurred between dogs and a South American canid. Do you have any guess what it might be?
I don't know.
So, interestingly, what they found is that this mystery canid that they discovered, this one individual in 2021, has 76 chromosomes. So they went through and they counted all the chromosomes, and what that means is that it has the exact number of chromosomes that you would expect between a hybridization of of either the pampas fox or the crab-eating fox. Remember, these are South American canids, along with the dog. It would have to have been a hybridization between a dog and one of these foxes.
Okay. So what conclusion are you drawing from that?
They did further. I'm not quite done yet. We'll get there. So they also then looked at the mitochondrial genome of this individual. They found that its mitochondrial genome was entirely pampas fox in nature, which would mean that its mother had to be a pampas fox. Okay, you
Okay.
okay with that?
Yep.
Great.
Perfectly fine.
It did not. It branched. This is showing the canid. They call it the canid. This is the mystery canid. It sorts with all the known variants that are found within the mitochondrial genome for the pampas fox. That's what this is indicating. Very distinct from the dog mitochondrial genome. This is showing the different kinds of groups that are known to be associated with dogs. If its mommy was a dog, it would be over here. No, its mommy associates with the pampas fox. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. The other thing that they found is that this mystery canid is actually heterozygous for sites that are polymorphic between dogs and foxes. What that means is that there are a number of sites within the genome for which there is no heterozygosity, that they are entirely homozygous between within pampas foxes that are different from dogs. So in the pampas fox, there may be a particular site where the nucleotide might be a GG, and in the dog, it might be CC, for instance. And therefore, what you would expect in in a hybrid of these two is that it should be heterozygous for those sites. And indeed, this mystery canid is heterozygous for sites that are polymorphic between dogs and the pampas fox, which means that this had to have been the result of a mating between a dog and a pampas fox.
Cool.
This means that dogs are capable of interbreeding with South American canids. This also means that wolves and dogs therefore had to share a common ancestor with all of the South American canids, according to the premise that interbreeding is an indication of this. Also, given their genetic similarity. Do you agree with that?
Okay. Now, what is that? The hybrid that they discovered, is it fertile?
It's not fertile. No, I don't know.
Okay, it's not fertile.
Actually, not entirely sure, but probably
So
not.
that
Because
doesn't really. Okay, so that's a
but they
problem, right?
hybridize. Like, this is the thing. So mules.
Yeah, but
Are
I
you
mean,
saying that, like,
I'm saying that makes a big difference, doesn't it? That
No,
they,
it doesn't. It
why,
does
why
not.
not? Because you can't go on and reproduce the next generation if you're not fertile.
You're saying that you can get separate kinds mating with each other to create an offspring that lives, seems perfectly fine, but is but maybe like sterile, right? Because we know that this occurs with mules and horses, right? Because that a
Right.
mule is the breeding of a donkey and a horse, isn't that right? Like, that's what a mule is, and a
Yeah,
mule is
something
sterile.
like that.
Yes,
Mhm.
right. And that is perfect evidence to indicate that horses and donkeys shared a common ancestor.
Well, that's your assumption. Okay. And
Okay.
I said, remember, I said I would
Right.
consider it good
Right.
evidence,
Yes.
but I wouldn't make a conclusion just based on whether they can interbreed. I said I would consider it good evidence.
So
But
this
you're
is good
telling
evidence
me,
then. So you would agree that
but you're telling me that when I say interbreeding, I'm talking about look, species that can go on and reproduce. You're telling me they can't make a fertile
I
offspring,
see. So
right? So
it can only work if the offspring can actually go on and reproduce.
well, yeah, because I mean, that's a showstopper. Okay, why is that a problem? That would be a showstopper. Let's just say God created, okay, according to their kind, and when they reproduced, they made an infertile offspring. Does that make any sense? Would that be able to continue for very long? So
Probably not. Yeah.
okay,
Like,
so then why are you scoffing at at my choice for
how would
accepting evidence
what
and
now
not
are
accepting
you
evidence?
saying that, like, a if a human and a whale reproduce, that they would be able to produce like any kind of offspring, that they would get offspring
No,
that would
I'm
result
not
from them.
saying that. I'm saying
Right.
you've produced one example where, hey, these are close enough in similarity
Yes.
that they were able to reproduce something, but it's not a thing that can go on and reproduce. So maybe they weren't really of the same
I see.
kind to begin with. And in addition to that, I already at the beginning gave you evidence that another piece of evidence for why the fox and dog and wolf do not, the dog and wolf may have a common ancestor, but the fox probably doesn't, and it was based on that section of the mitochondrial
I
DNA.
I
So I
look,
just gave
I'm
another piece of
sorry.
evidence.
Look, we're
Okay.
talking, I know I'm calling these foxes, but they actually they associate genetically, whether you talk about mitochondrial genomes or nuclear genomes, and in this study they use both. They associate as a monophyletic tree, right? That the South American canids are all included here, right? You're confusing fox, the fox group, with the South American foxes, which is actually just one monophyletic group. Male
Okay,
wolf and
well,
bush
like
dog
I
along with
said,
each
I
other.
never agreed to your whole tree.
I understand. But
Okay, so
the thing
you're
is,
you're
so
you're basing your argument on your
look,
tree that
I
I've
am
never
saying,
accepted.
look, I am saying that the ancestor, or a relative of the gray wolf shown over here, can breed with the pampas fox over here to create a a viable offspring, right? That
Viable,
is
but
infertile,
not
probably. I actually
reproducible.
don't know. I mean, it probably is, because its numbers of chromosomes are different from this guy and this guy, because it is hybrid between the two, right? This organism has 78 chromosomes. This organism has 74 chromosomes. This organism has 76 chromosomes. Yes.
Okay.
So they're probably, this dog, probably this canid. I can't call it a dog. It is now a new, unique type of organism that is the hybrid between a breeding between these two very disparate species, incredibly disparate species. The genetic evidence indicates that they probably shared a common ancestor. We can even go to the table here, right? Around 3.8 million years ago, when when some type of wolf-like organism made its way into South America and then diverged into all these different species, yet they are still able to interbreed with the canids that stayed in North America and in Europe, and create a viable offspring, an organism that can be born, that can live, like wander around. Like this is just wandering around. Like this was not like a pet or anything.
Look, I've already made my point about that, so
Gotcha.
I'm not gonna just keep repeating myself. I think I already said it like 3 times. So,
Yes.
I mean, we can you feel like this is good evidence, and I've given you a reason that I don't
Right.
accept this. Yeah.
Because it cannot interbreed. So you're saying because it cannot breed with another like living organism, this is then bad evidence that that dogs and pampas foxes share a common ancestor.
I'm saying if it's infertile, then it's a good sign that it's not from the same created kind
Gotcha.
because it
You're
if
saying
that was
created
it, that was
kinds
true.
can interbreed.
Yeah, I mean that.
So
Well,
what's to
I'm not,
stop?
but I'm not saying. I'm
Yeah.
saying there could be isolations in population and loss of genetic, uh, information that could eventually cause things that once could interbreed to not interbreed. Okay,
Could
so
you
that's a
breed,
possibility.
right, even though they have separate ancestry. So you're
Yes.
saying that could a mouse and a bird interbreed? Could you
Well,
get like
you're.
a viable offspring that produces
I
chemistry?
don't think a mouse and a bird are common. I'm going to just say that
Yes.
those are separate ancestry. Okay, so I'm
Okay.
assuming that they will
Sure.
never be able to interbreed, and they never could.
Right.
Okay.
So but what's to stop that? Why can't they create a viable offspring?
Well, the differences in chromosomes, differences in genetics. I mean, the differences in reproductive system, right?
These guys have differences in chromosomes, right? 78 versus 74.
Okay, so
So
you're
but
saying a bird and a mouse
yes.
should.
Right.
So are you like what is your point with the bird and the mouse thing? Like, what are you? Where are you
Let me
trying to go
explain
with
it.
that? Okay.
What would make, say, a separate created kind that resulted in wolves, jackals, coyotes, and dogs? different that was separately created from South American canids, the Maine wolf, the bush dog, and the South American foxes. Why are they able to breed and create a hybrid shown here? Why couldn't we have, say, a dog breed with a bird to create a similar hybrid? It would be probably infertile, but why wouldn't they be able to do that? We know that they
You,
can't.
okay, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but it is very strange. Okay, and
What is
so
strange
and
about that?
first of all, you're making so many assumptions with your South American canid chart. Okay,
I am not making assumptions.
so but um
You're just
so
asserting that. What are the assumptions that I'm making?
well, you again, like I going back to, you're
Sure.
assuming common ancestry. Okay. And I already gave you the reason that I'm not necessarily accepting common ancestry for that entire chart. I
We have
pointed out
already
the fossil
agreed
evidence.
that similar genetic relationships that you can create a phylogeny based on that genetic relationship. That you can do this within
I
humans, that you can do
agreed
this
for
within
that with
dogs, and that you
dogs
can also
and
do this within
wolves. I
dogs
did not
and
agree.
hold on, please let me finish. That you can do this with dogs relative to wolves, that you can do this with dogs, wolves, and coyotes, that you can do this with dogs, wolves, coyotes, and jackals. You can create a phylogeny, and that there's going to be differences within the genome that account for and that allow us to map out when those divergences occur. We can do this within humans, we can do this within dogs, but we can also do this within, let's just call it a kind, the North American European wolf kind, which is going to be the jackals, coyotes, wolves, and dogs, right? You can do the same thing and you create that phylogeny. That
Okay.
is not assuming universal common ancestry that like the wolves share a common ancestor with the tomatillo, for instance. We're not going that far. We're only looking within that group.
Right. And the part that I said I looked into was the dogs and wolves. Right. And I
Right.
said, I have good evidence to think that they came from a common ancestor. And I said, I have good evidence to think that the fox didn't. You brought up all the stuff about the South American canids. I have not looked except for the maned wolf and the bush dog. And I said, there's good evidence to me that they did not share a common ancestor. So I
You didn't
never
say any
agreed to
evidence.
your,
What is your evidence
yes,
that they
I
don't share a
did.
common ancestor?
I told you they have different chromosomes. And I said I could turn the evidence that you gave for common ancestry and easily make it against common ancestry.
So you're
So
saying that the number of chromosomes is a reason to think that they don't share common ancestry. Is
I'm
that right?
saying it could be one, although I recognize that foxes, may have a common ancestor. They have different chromosomes. So I'm not
Yes.
making an absolute. Okay.
Okay. Well, then
But
what are you saying?
I'm trying to say, look, this is a hard thing to figure out.
Okay.
You're making an absolute because of your assumptions of deep common ancestry. I'm not going to say universal because you don't want to go back that far, but you're making all your assumptions based on your deep common ancestry. And I'm not starting with that assumption. So
I'm
I have
not.
to evaluate the evidence. I have to
You keep saying
evaluate.
that, and I'm not doing that. I'm
I
not
have
assuming deep common
let
ancestry.
let me let me you are assuming
No,
at
I'm
least
not.
okay, all of you. Okay, so I'm
We're
then
taking a
fine.
stepwise pattern, right? Within
But you're
dogs, we can
stepping
create a
farther than
phylogeny
I
for dogs. That we
you're
can create a
stepping
phylogeny with
deeper.
dogs plus wolves, and you have no problem with establishing a phylogeny of dogs and wolves. That you have no problem establishing a phylogeny of dogs, wolves, and coyotes. That we can do
Well,
that. We can base it
I
on
told you,
genetic evidence that that's the case. But then there's some point, which I don't understand what it is, where we're not going to allow it. I even bring up evidence now of an organism that can be resulted from an interbreeding of a South American canid and a dog. And that this is no longer good enough evidence that they actually shared common ancestry because, I haven't even looked it up in the paper, but, we're probably assuming that it's infertile given that it has a unique number of chromosomes. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually totally infertile because we also know that like the total number of chromosomes can vary quite a bit, especially within dogs.
okay, well, remember, I'm not making any absolute proclamations here.
Of
I'm
course.
trying to look at the evidence And I'm giving you various things that I consider evidence that they were of the same created kind, had the same common ancestor. The evidence types that I look at is, can they interbreed with offspring that can reproduce? Because if they can't reproduce, then that would be really silly, right? That would be the end of the line. So can they reproduce and make fertile offspring? Do they, have like, are there other reasons, like, okay, genetically, can we get back to a consensus sequence on, like the mitochondrial DNA, which is not going to be, in certain sections as affected as others? So, I mean, that we can identify this is from mutation and not some other type of, genetic variation. So, I mean, I'm giving you reasons, but I mean, if you disagree,
You're
that's fine.
very
We have a
confused in the
fundamental
reasons,
disagreement.
and they don't make sense.
Okay, well, I mean,
Okay.
that's up to you. But I mean, like I said,
That is, yes. I mean, that is my judgment on your reasons. I don't think that they're very good reasons. They don't make
well,
sense. They're not consistent with the overall pattern that we see here. You've created some sort of fake boundary where we can no longer draw phylogenies based on genetic evidence. And now you're moving the goalposts that it isn't just simply interbreeding, but it has to be interbreeding, creating a viable an offspring that can also reproduce. And honestly, I don't think
I
coyotes
never
and
limited
wolves
myself.
can create. Well, I no, I that's not true, right? Because I know coyotes and wolves can create viable offspring because there are these weird hybrids, but that's not true for jackals. They can create an offspring, but I don't think that they're fertile, and that's going to
Okay,
always
so
be the
see, now
case. Mhm.
you just, so you tried to trick me into accepting
Not tricking
jackals as
anything.
a, you did, because I
They
told
create a
you
hybrid. They can
I
interbreed.
can't go further. I can't go further because I haven't looked into it. And you were like,
Gotcha.
"Oh, but these can all
Okay.
interbreed." Okay.
Yes.
So the point is, I'm not arbitrarily drawing a fake line. I don't know where the line is. I'm admitting what I don't know. And
Great.
I'm giving you like things where the line may
Right.
be. Okay.
The
But
point.
you
The
aren't
point that I'm trying to make
you're
is
not
that there.
admitting your common ancestry presupposition. You're not admitting that you don't have a line. Do you admit
The
you don't have a
The
line?
point that I am making is that when you look at the genetic evidence, and I've laid out a ton of genetic evidence here, lots of papers for people to look up on mutation rates, that we can then use that as a clock for creating these phylogenetic relationships. You can do this within dogs. Even if you do it within dogs, you end up with ancestry for dogs that is on the order of tens of thousands of years ago, just within dogs alone. You already agree that they share a common ancestry, but that you have to be able to date it back to at least 10,000 years ago to allow for the mutation rate to occur. You also agree that they share common ancestry with wolves and coyotes, which means that the common ancestor for that group has to be at least 100,000 years ago, 135,000, if I recall from that table. You include
Okay.
jackals, which they can create offspring with. Now we're talking about 800,000 years ago.
All right.
And that,
And
where
my
is the
response to
line? There
you,
has to be a line that for a creationist, and now we're talking about that you can get interbreeding between South American canids and ancestors of the wolf, which is the dog, and they can create an offspring that lives, that is moving around and doing its thing. Yet somehow that's not going to be evidence that they shared common ancestry, even though, of course, if you look at the genomes of, say, any of these South American canids, the crab-eating fox, the pampas fox, the bush dog, or the Maine wolf, you compare it to a dog or a wolf, they're going to be sharing especially in the coding regions, something on the order of like 99.7 or 99.8 similarity. But you're going to say that is somehow they are separately created.
okay, remember the
Why,
only
why would they
ones
even
that
be that
I,
similar? Like, what is it about what why would they be that similar if they are separately created? That doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me. If they're
and
separately
now we're
created.
getting back to
Mhm.
your religious presuppositions.
No,
This is where you have religion
this is not
involved.
religious. I'm sorry. Like it doesn't have to be religious, because you could say that, like, an alien showed up on Earth and decided to make the lineage that led to the South American canids, and the lineage that led to the North American European versions, which is the wolf and the coyote and the dog, right? We could
Okay.
say that, yes, and that would be separate ancestry. Why are they so similar? Why is the South American canids so similar to the North American canids?
Well,
And why are
you
both
gave
of them
one
also very, very similar
possibility,
to the
which is
fox?
probably you gave one
Sorry, what?
possibility, which is among a lot of different possibilities,
Mhm.
right? So I'm not offering a possibility, okay? Because I'm not
Of
getting into
course.
the mind of
Because you're a
I'm
bad
not
faith
getting
actor, Rebecca, honestly. You're not
okay.
offering
Why is
anything.
that a bad faith actor?
Because you're sitting here throwing well, you think that you're throwing tomatoes at like evolution with these silly videos that you do, but you're really not. And it's also just bad faith because you don't want to actually offer any kind of mechanism. You're just going to sit here and go through the paper that I talked about last week. You want to highlight every little place where it says may and might, and it's really kind of pathetic, honestly. I mean, like, you not
Okay.
offering any kind of mechanism to
In
support what we all know what you actually believe,
yeah,
which is that the earth is 6,000 years old, that there was a global
maybe
flood,
8,000.
that the stupid dogs all descended from, the Noah gathered them all on the ark, and that there were only two of them, and yet somehow there was no inbreeding depression for any of the organisms that were paired off and just twos on the ark. Now we have this incredible variety of life across Earth, of the 34 different existing species of canids, and that somehow, I mean, I know that you don't believe this, but many creationists accept that all the canids share a common ancestor. They all descended from a pair that was on the ark. We know
I
that
gave
this is
you
what you think.
I told you there's sources that don't accept that. But anyway, go on.
Whatever, even if it's within the three, it still doesn't make any sense. And the timing can't work. It cannot work with the mutation rates that we know that exist today. And so then you come up with
Okay.
these, like, just BS, frankly, of like that genetic drift and gene flow are somehow going to be causal mechanisms of introducing new mutations into the genome, which just is not how that works. It simply doesn't work that way.
Okay, and that is something that if I'm wrong, okay, I'm wrong. Okay.
You are wrong.
So
Yes.
I will totally admit that. In fact,
Gene flow and
I'm
genetic drift
sitting here
cannot
getting
introduce.
messages from my creation advisor.
Gotcha.
And so if I listen to his messages and he's like, you were wrong about that, then I'm gonna come on here and I will make a video saying I was wrong.
Please.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, but
but only if your creationist advisor tells you that you were wrong.
well, I will look into it beyond that. Okay. So I'm
Okay,
not gonna
please,
I will
yes.
look into it
Yeah,
beyond that.
try to find another source. Yes.
Yeah,
I don't
but
trust the creationist advisor.
okay, I will look into it beyond that. But
Uh-huh.
the thing that you're doing, which is what a lot of people do, is when you're not able to offer evidence for evolution, which you were unable to do,
Okay, that's
you
totally
turn
untrue.
and you try to attack young earth creation. I
No,
told you, okay, please
most
don't
of the
interrupt me. I
discussion
let you
has
talk.
been
I let you talk. I let you
okay,
talk.
fine. Yes,
Let me
that's fine.
talk. Okay.
Please.
I am, you can call me a bad faith actor if you want, but I'm very clear about what I believe. I'm a young earth creationist. I totally believe that. I believe the earth is, probably less than 10,000 years old. Okay. So yes, I believe that, but I'm not here to promote that. I'm here to show people why evolution is wrong. Okay. And so I'm asking you to bring evidence for evolution. You were unable to do that.
That's not
Instead,
true.
I refuted your evidence.
No, you
And I
didn't.
gave you several
You
reasons
didn't
why.
refute my
Okay, well,
evidence.
it's up to you. I'll let the audience decide, but I
Okay,
don't
yes.
accept it, and it's my channel, and I
Yes.
have good reasons for not accepting it as evidence
Sure.
for evolution.
But
Now,
you're wrong.
so now you're making me lose my train of thought because you're
Sorry.
interrupting me.
Yes, didn't mean to interrupt you, but go ahead.
All right. So I want people to know the truth about reality, that evolution is wrong. I'm going to fully admit here, young earth creation could be false.
It
Okay?
has to be false.
It could be false.
It has
And
to be
in fact,
false.
my
All the stuff we just talked about, it is totally incompatible with the young earth model, right?
well,
It's
there's
completely
mixed evidence.
incompatible.
There's mixed evidence, and
Mixed.
there's
Oh
mixed
my
evidence.
God. You're going to take
And-
like a tomatillo fossil from 40 million years ago, and you're going to say, well, this just obviously throws out all of evolution, all the evidence we can
No.
disprove with a single tomatillo fossil from 40 million years ago.
No, but I would say
What I showed you is
I would
not
say
mixed.
soft
This
tissue
clearly
being found in
shows that the
dinosaurs
young
should
earth
give.
model is completely, without any merit whatsoever, like zero.
Okay, so then then we could look. I don't like to get into arguing about this. I do have some young earth stuff on my channel, but I admit that there is some evidence against young earth creation, right? So, and I'm not equipped to go talk about every field of science related to young Earth creation, and it probably never will be. Okay,
Right.
so
But
that's
what
not
I'm
my
saying,
focus.
just to interrupt, the molecular dating that we walk through today in very careful pattern is utterly incompatible with the younger model.
It's
Absolutely,
built
completely
on the
incompatible.
assumption of universal common ancestry, and it has
It's not based on
repeatedly
universal common
shown to
ancestry.
be wrong,
No.
wrong, wrong by millions
We
of
already
years.
walked
So
through that you
I'm
can
in.
use those same models for creating phylogenies within dogs and wolves, within dogs, wolves, and coyotes. Use the same method to then expand it out to other organisms. It's the same thing.
Okay. Um, that's your assumption. I've already given my problems with it, so I
Right.
don't want to get. We've already gone through all this, so I don't want to
I'm
repeat it.
saying,
But I
like,
want to
you
know
allow
why are
for
you
common
accusing me of
ancestry.
being a bad faith actor? What is
Yes.
bad faith about what I am doing right now?
I think it's bad faith for you to say that you don't have any idea about what it is, when obviously you do. But you will also want to say that it's theological or religious, and it doesn't have to be. Discussion of separate ancestry doesn't necessarily have to be theological or religious or supernatural. It doesn't even have to be supernatural, right?
Okay, good. Then let's okay, so that
But I
let's stick on that for a minute because
sure,
I don't think you've seen the point. Okay?
that
And
is the
so
point.
when you say why would these things be similar? Okay? And
Yes.
I don't give an answer, it's because okay, I can make assumptions about it. I can say I think God
Sure.
would do it that way just to,
Start there.
because he
Why
wanted
not?
to.
That's a
Because
hypothesis.
but that is am I being scientific? Am I
I
being
would say yes.
scientific by doing that?
Yes.
So
I would say yes.
because well, and see, I don't think I am because
Okay.
how
I
could I
disagree.
test it? How could I test it? How could I test what
That's a
was
great
in God's
question.
mind?
Yes.
Okay. How could I
So,
test what was in God's mind?
okay, I'm not asking. Okay, obviously that's hard to test, but you
Okay.
could look for evidence. You could come up with various hypotheses that would, because you're basically arguing
Like what?
common designer, therefore common design, right? And that therefore that would explain, like, for instance, if you believe that South American canids and the wolf group have separate ancestry, but the reason why their genomes are 99.8% similar to each other, well, the reason why is because they had a common designer, and the designer was like wanting to make, say, wolf like looking animals, and that therefore when he or she or they were assembling all the little genes and they needed to make them all look like wolf like animals, well, obviously you're going to pick wolf genes to do that, right?
Well, that again is getting into what was God's mind. What was
Or
God's
like
intention?
a
Why
designer. We don't have to say God's mind, but that would at least be a somewhat plausible hypothesis that is kind of
how
testable in
would it
some
be
way.
tested though? See, it wouldn't be
I
scientific
would love
because
to
it
come
wouldn't
back
be
and
able to be
talk about it
tested.
with you, because I actually have a great explainer on it.
Okay. Well, for me, okay,
It's
I
a separate
believe
question, obviously, but
creation was an event that God did that's not
okay,
repeatable, it's not testable.
sure,
Okay. So I believe it was from God, and I can't get in his mind about why he did what he did. Okay. So that's
sure.
all
But
I
we
can
can
go by
but,
is the
like, look.
revelation that's in the
Mhm,
book that I believe. Okay.
mhm,
He created each according to its own kind. So, this is the revelation that I'm choosing to believe. It's a religious belief that I have. Okay. It's not a scientific
mhm.
belief, it's a religious belief.
But it's
Okay.
not
But
exactly a religious belief, like, because there's obviously specific outcomes that one would expect if those things actually happen the way that they did. And what I see you doing, and this is why I think it's bad faith, is that mostly, I mean, you're not even doing this. Like, you actually are just completely uh, ignoring any effort to actually try to create a cohesive model and mechanism to explain your what you actually believe.
yes,
And that instead you think that I mean, I think that this is probably what you believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you can punch enough holes in evolution or the evolutionary model, well, then people are going to be less likely to believe it. So therefore, they're going to believe in the religious doctrine of creationism.
I hope it will open people's minds a little bit when they realize that they've been deceived and taught something as a fact, and that it's been drilled into their brains over and over again. If you want to be scientific, you have to believe this, not even realizing that it's completely goes against so many of our scientific observations.
But that's
So
totally not
yes,
true.
that's what I want to open people's mind
Right.
to. I want them
What do you
to
think?
realize
Which model do you
that
think goes against more of the scientific observations?
oh,
The evolutionary model or the
for
creationist model?
sure, evolution. For sure.
Really?
Evolution by far.
Oh my
By
God!
far. By
Really?
far. By far.
You're are you serious?
Yes.
All
So
these problems of
I wouldn't be on
requiring.
here exposing myself to this.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't be on here
I
exposing
don't know.
myself to this
I
if I thought there was good evidence for evolution.
but
I would just hang back.
but you think that there are more problems with evolution than the creation
Absolutely.
model?
Oh,
Oh
so
wow.
many more.
Okay.
So many more.
That's wild to me.
So many more.
That is completely
Few
wild to me.
problems. Look, there's a few things in young Earth creation that I can't quite deal with.
Oh,
But
few?
there's a mountain of evidence against evolution.
That's
Okay.
totally not true.
That's my perspective. You're
All right.
asking
Well,
my
that's
perspective. I'm
delusional.
telling you my perspective.
All
And
right.
that's what I'm
So
here to do.
radiometric dating, the ordering of the geological column, the all of the molecular data, like the molecular dating that we were just talking about today. Like, the fact that you agree that the coyote and the dog and the wolf share a common ancestor, yet with the mutation rate that we have now seen in multiple papers, has to push that divergence to 135,000 years ago, which is, what is that? That's 20 times what you think the age of the Earth is?
Okay, well, and I haven't even looked into that arena. Okay, so like
I think you need
I
to.
can't give you an answer about that.
That's
right
what
now.
I'm saying.
Okay, but
Yes.
you came on here with such great evidence for evolution with your man wolf and bush dog, which I
Yeah.
completely destroyed.
You did not destroy it. That's
okay.
BS.
Well, for me, it was destroyed.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
and
Sure.
people can make their own
Right.
conclusions. But
The
with
private
regard to
alleles
the
discovered within the bush dog and the Maine wolf, these are unique mutations that had to have occurred after the divergence of those two species. That's what
that's
that
your
shows.
assumption. That's all
Of
based
course.
on your assumption.
Right.
I can
Right.
turn it around on you and say
Mhm.
those private alleles are evidence
Yes.
that they do not have a common ancestor.
How is that the case?
I'm saying the evidence can work either way.
No, it
So,
can't.
y-
They
yes,
share
it can.
99.9% of their genome is identical to each other. Yet they have these private alleles, and you're going to say the private alleles are the reason why they don't have
I'm saying I can
don't
use
have
that as
common
evidence
ancestry?
that they don't. But
How is that evidence that they don't
when
have common
you get
ancestry?
down to why for you that's not a good explanation,
Well, okay, especially since
what you
yes.
jump to is your religious ideas about what God could and should do.
No, it's not. It's not about God. Like,
Why would God do it this way? That's what
I
you
didn't
keep
say
turning
that.
to.
I didn't say that. That's not what I said.
Okay, what did you say?
What I said, and of course, people are going to replay it back. So I probably won't repeat exactly what I said. So
Okay,
be
that's
fair
fine.
with me.
No,
So
I know.
essentially, that the private alleles that we see within the bush dog and the Maine wolf are unique to either the bush dog or the Maine wolf relative to all other canids. Okay, and I don't think I said that part, but that is the thing that's also really important to this. Okay, that they yet canid the bush dog and the Maine wolf and the other South American canids share 99.9% of their genome, or maybe it's 99.8. It's really, really high. That is an indication that they share a common ancestor. Also, the fact that we have we have an outgroup, a dog that can interbreed with one of the South American canids, indicates that at least that entire group must have shared a common ancestor with each other. Given the fact that they can interbreed. And the thing is,
Why
like,
are you
creationists
saying
typically
must?
use that as a way of demonstrating of that there's a kind, right? But anyway, go ahead. Sorry, what were you saying?
When you're talking, let's put the breeding aside and just say your point about the genetic similarity.
Yes.
Why must that point to a common ancestor?
The fact that they have
Don't repeat the
99.9%.
facts. You've already told me the
Mm.
facts. What would cause that? What is the idea in your
Yes.
mind?
That there was a population of organisms that they split going to different regions. And if we're especially talking about bush dogs and Maine wolves, they ended up in different regions that have very different environments, different selection pressures. Therefore, there would be selection for variants that we know occur just through random mutation. Like that is a thing that happens. You already accepted that. We looked at a bunch of papers that show random mutation occurs. Some variants can and are beneficial. We know that as well. Some of those variants can become fixed in the population that would be unique to that lineage that would not be found in any other canid lineage. Those are known as private alleles. Some of those private alleles are associated with things like limb length, with different changes in dietary structure. That would be an indication that these organisms were under different selection pressures. New variants arose through mutation, a totally natural mechanism that then was then fixed within the population and allowed for these new features to be exploited, such as the ability to process fruit, the sugars that are within fruit, or longer limbs that allow them to navigate through the grasslands, or shorter limbs to be able to be in like woody parts that are very marshy in their environment.
Okay, for those who have just joined, I have
Other
responded
people
to
joining.
everything that Dr. Thompson said at the very beginning of this video. I don't want to repeat myself, so I'm not going to go through it again. But what you're doing, Dr. Thompson, is you're telling your story about the way that you think things went. And you're
Sure.
saying
Yeah.
this genetic similarity shows that they must have had a common ancestor. What are you basing that thought on? That's what I'm trying to get
Yes.
to.
That
And
these
I
two
don't want to hear the
species. Yes.
story. I
That's
want to
fine.
hear
These two
why
species
that
share
factors
more genetically than they do with any other species in the face of the planet.
right. And
That is
why does
already an
that,
indication that they share a common ancestor.
but why does that factor against my idea that God created?
I don't see how God created would. I mean, what does that mean? That doesn't make any sense
So
to me.
what I'm saying is there could
Mhm.
be a million different options for what you suggested one with aliens could have done it.
Sure.
Okay. So we could come up with, many different options. Let's maybe a million would be an overplay. I don't know if we're that creative, but maybe we could come up with 100 different options for how organisms got this genetic similarity.
Mhm.
So what is causing you to choose this particular thing as the one that you believe? Is there an idea that it's going against?
You're saying what? That the similarity, because we have to explain the similarity, right? Why are these two groups of organisms more similar to each other than they are to any other organism on the face of the planet? That is the observation.
Right.
Right.
That's the observation. But do we have to explain why?
Yes.
Or do we just have to can we just say that is the way it is? That's our scientific
No, we want to
observation.
know why.
And what if there's a limit on what we have access to knowing?
So the
So
thing is, we already know that similar processes can occur and do occur in organisms for which we can directly observe this. Like you can watch phylogeny emerge in the lab with different strains of bacteria, but we also can easily intuit this just within the dogs themselves. Like the different breeds of dogs create this distinct phylogeny that's based on similarity of genetics. Like the genomes of more closely related breeds of dogs are going to be more similar to each other than they are to the more disparate related breeds of dogs. And also bring in the wolves. We already agreed that the wolf and the dog share a common ancestor. And that's where it's especially disparate. And that means that that node, when we take that mutation rate back, it's around 30,000 years ago when the last common ancestor must have been between wolves and dogs when they separated into these separate lineages. And so that process, it's not a difficult process to think that that can also go back in time to say include coyotes. Therefore, that had to have been 135,000 years ago, based on the mutation rate that has been observed in numerous studies for the last 20 some years, fully consistent with the one that was just published about a month ago. That
and if
where
there is a
Mhm.
line that it doesn't go back beyond,
Yeah.
would you be able to figure that out? And if so, how?
The So, okay, I think a priori, so you either have to come up with the idea, because basically we're talking about two competing hypotheses. One is common ancestry, and that we can push back common ancestry to include more and more species based on genomic similarity. We can also include other things. We can also include fossil evidence. We can include morphological similarities too. We can include those things. And then certainly we see that as well. But of course, you got to be careful to some degree when you include those things. But still, it's very, very largely consistent with the molecular data. I feel like the molecular data can serve as a really good rooting structure. Maybe I'm biased because that's the kind of biologist that I am. I'm more of a molecular cellular biologist, and a paleontologist might be like screaming at the screen, thinking like, what about the fossils? I mean, okay, maybe. But so that pattern of evidence is fully consistent with the idea of common ancestry. Now, the pattern that we see is that the Eurasian and North American canids share more genomically to each other than they do to the South American canids. But then the South American canids share more genomically to each other than they do the North American canids. Yet you can also look at both of those groups, and they are more similar to each other than either of them are to the fox group, right?
We've already said this like 5 times.
But that pattern exists. We definitely agree that pattern exists. The evolutionary argument is that the reason why that is the case is because of common ancestry that goes back millions of years ago, right? So that there had to have been a common ancestor for the foxes, the South American canids, and the North American canids and Eurasian canids a long, long time ago, on the order of around 10 million years ago. And that's what the genomic evidence would indicate. There's also fossil evidence to support that. Now, the alternative model to that is what? Now, I suppose if we just say that like a designer or designers would have then created these separate ancestries, somehow also ignoring the fact that we can see these mechanisms working in real time today. But if there was separate ancestry that allowed for this, why are they so similar? So if foxes, and I'm talking about like actual foxes, not the South American foxes, if they are a distinct group that was made by a designer, why are they so genomically similar to the other canids than either of them are, or as a group are, to say like bears?
And my answer is God created.
I don't know what that means.
What's the problem?
That's not a mechanism.
I didn't promise you a mechanism.
Sure.
I told you this is the reason. This is the reason that I'm not trying to supply you with a scientific hypothesis, because I know I cannot test why God created. So, okay, I might be able to test how if there was, if there was possible access to that, but I don't think there is. Okay, so I can't test those things. So I'm not presenting that as a scientific hypothesis. I'm saying that's what I believe, and I believe it's true. But not everything is accessible to science. So
things start to get more nested, right? So then you can look at the other caniforms, the bears, the raccoons, the other ones. They're sort of escaping my mind, even though I had a whole presentation on this with Hovind about a year ago. They are more genetically similar to each other than any of them are to the feliforms. Like the which are the cats and the other cat-like organisms, the hyenas, for instance. Why does that pattern? Like, why are we seeing this nested hierarchy that's so distinct as we compare them genomically? There has to be an explanation for that. Like, there has to be an explanation.
Why does there have to be an explanation for that?
Because it's a pattern that we see.
Okay, first of all, I don't even agree that we have all these, clear-cut nested hierarchies. I disagree with that.
Well, then you just totally disagree with like literally mountains of data and dozens of papers.
Okay, that's too big of a conversation just to launch into today. We've already been going for 2 hours. Okay, but the point is, I wanted to register my complaint about it. Okay, that's it. But we can talk about it another time. But basically, this is the point I'm trying to get to. And you have actually said this several times, either in our previous conversation and maybe even once today. Why would God do it that way? Okay. So that shows me that actually what you're doing is you have a theology about what God would do and wouldn't do. And that's what you're using to contrast that's what you're using to bolster your evidence for evolution, because we see these similarities and God wouldn't do it that way. That's what you're using. That's what you're using to bolster. But you're bolstering it based on a theological idea that have, not a
I'm
scientific idea.
saying that there probably is a potential mechanism, a design mechanism that you could say, which is, the common descent versus common design mechanism.
Well,
That the
how is
reason
common
why
design a
bears and
mechanism,
dogs,
though? How is
so
common design a mechanism? I believe in common
sure,
design,
right,
but how is that a mechanism that's
when God was,
testable?
let me explain it, okay, for the audience if they don't understand what I mean. When bears don't design much other than their own dens and really elaborate poops. Um, when God was designing the bear group, and when God was designing the dog group, the wolf group, or the separate different groups or whatever, the reason why he picked, or she or they, whatever, however you want to call the designers, they determined that they need to use, sort of carnivore like genes in order to assemble carnivore like animals, and that carnivores all look similar to each other because they do share morphological features. They have carnassial teeth, they have these auditory bullae that are very similar to each other. Like bears and dogs and raccoons, they do share certain morphological traits with each other, and that might be the reason why the designer or designers picked similar genetics in order to allow for them to have some of those similar features, like morphological features. That would be
Okay,
an argument.
that's a fine idea, but
Mhm.
it's not testable. So
Okay,
I'm not against that idea. In fact, that's a good idea. Why not?
sure.
But
Now,
it's
do you
not
think that if we could
testable.
find examples that run contrary to that, would that then create a
But
problem?
see, exactly no, because
No.
again, it's not a testable scientific hypothesis. It's
Okay.
a you know, this is this is theological thinking about why God would do something,
Well, I
right?
appreciate you being very frank about the fact that creationism is an utterly non-scientific idea, that it has absolutely nothing to say about science, and that there is nothing that science can reflect upon creationism, and that you cannot possibly use scientific evidence, in order to support the creation model.
Well, now there are some aspects that you can. Okay.
What?
So, and what I mean by this is, for example, I'm not in the business of doing this. Okay. But there are people who are making models and they're doing this based on the revelation in the Bible about the flood. And so they're saying, if there was a worldwide flood, we would see such and such. And then they're looking to see if we see such and such. They're trying to examine what is present on earth to related to these various events. Okay. Now, I am not interested in doing that. All right. So that is not what I'm about. I'm glad there are people doing it. I think it's probably important to do that. Okay. So I'm not saying there's nothing related to creationism that cannot be tested. I'm saying specifically that what cannot be tested is what is in the mind of God in creating certain organisms the way that we find them. And there may be the answer that, oh, we discovered that, hey, actually this wasn't original to the creation, so God didn't do that. That's something we can figure out.
Can I
But
ask you a
what we
question?
can't do
Sure.
is figure out what's in the mind of
But
God.
why
So
not?
that's
But why not? When we, like, for instance, if you look at a what we know would be a designed object, like a hammer, right? We know that hammers, I can go to the store and buy one. It'll say made in wherever, probably China, although maybe not anymore since we're tariffing. But there's a hammer, right? And then of course we know the mechanism by which hammers are made. But still, you can also intuit purpose with the hammer,
that's true.
right?
That's true.
Yes.
Yep. And that
So,
that
but you
that could
cannot.
be an aspect that could be
Mhm.
an aspect that we can like think about and appreciate. And we
That's
could
getting to,
even
to the mind. Wouldn't you agree?
yes, but not in the same way,
Well, I'm
right?
sorry. Why
Because
not?
not in the same way, because
Why
we're
not?
looking well, I'll tell you if you stop interrupting
Okay.
me.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. You
All
just
right.
repeated yourself. Yeah.
Because if we have something that has a clear function, that it would be appropriate to say, okay, this looks like it was designed to do this. Okay. I don't think there's any problem with that. We could be wrong, but there are times when we could be wrong about that. But there's nothing wrong with looking at what is present and trying, if we see a purpose or whatever. But what you're doing is you're trying to take it a step further and say, wait, I can't identify why this would be this way. And so you're trying to go from not from purpose, but like from what you see is lack of purpose.
No,
You see what I'm saying?
basically
You're
trying
saying
to,
there's lack of purpose. Why would there be this genetic similarity? So you're going from what you can't understand, and you're saying, well, then because it's like that, and I can't think of a reason why it would be like that, therefore, God wouldn't do it that way.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, what are you saying then?
Okay.
Where are you? What's the heart of it then?
Like, what's the purpose of a Maine wolf or a bush dog?
You're asking me to tell what the
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. Right. You're saying
I'm
these
not
are
ready
designed.
to speak about. I'm not ready to speak about that.
I got
I
you.
said I might be able to do that with something
Right.
like a hammer. Okay, but I'm not ready to say for
Really?
an entire
Okay.
organism why that exists.
But they are designed, right?
I think so, and I think
Right.
they show obvious things of. I think
All
they show
organisms
obvious
are
properties
designed.
of design.
Yes. Right. All organisms are designed.
I believe that organisms were designed, but they may not have been designed exactly in their present form, because we do see that changes can happen through mutation and through other things, variation and such. So I would say there was a lot of potentials involved, right? In what was like what we can observe, that we know that there was potentials, right? Because there's genetic variation. So there's potentials involved, but there's also things that may have been not intended but have occurred, such as a random mutation.
What was the purpose behind making 9 species that are in the South American continent?
This is where I think you're showing what you're doing. I'm not ready to. I already told you I'm not ready to give a purpose.
Okay.
And that's the part where
But a designer does things for a reason, right?
Well, yeah, I'm sure he has his reasons, but I mean,
or they, right? Don't assume he.
they.
Right?
Okay, all right.
Right. Yes.
I'll give you they. It's
Sure.
possible.
They,
Okay.
she. It might even be a she.
It could be a she.
Right.
Hey, actually, God appeared to me as a woman in a dream.
What?
But I don't. Yes, it's true.
Sacrilege?
I'm just telling you the way God appeared. That's not the only time God has appeared to me in a dream.
I mean,
he's appeared in a male form in dreams too.
Right.
So,
and maybe that was the Holy Ghost, because you believe in 3 forms of the God. I mean, are you a triune Christian?
Yes.
Okay, so you believe that there are 3 forms:
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Yeah.
Right, and they can. I'm kind of curious about this. I mean, I don't want to go on too much longer, but I've always been curious about like it's not polytheism, because it's considered one form, right? But one entity
one
in
God.
3 forms. Yes, but they can coexist in separate places at the same time.
Well, we would say 3 persons, not 3 forms.
3 persons, okay, right? But it's a ghost. Is a ghost a person?
Well, we can say the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, but yes, the Holy Spirit is a person.
It's a person, like a corporeal thing, like the way Jesus was. Jesus was a corporeal entity.
Corporeal, no, I don't think the Holy Spirit is corporeal.
Because like Jesus bodily rose into heaven. You believe that, right?
Yes.
Yes. That his physical body rose into heaven.
Yes.
And that it's still there today. And that therefore he's a corporeal entity.
Yes.
Yes. The Holy Ghost does not have a corporeal component.
I believe that's true.
I don't know. Is it true or no?
The Holy Spirit is not corporeal.
Corporeal. Can the Holy, so what? Okay. And then God, obviously, potentially can even appear in female form, at least mentally. Is God corporeal? Or the Father, I should say.
The Father, I tend to think no, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay.
So there's a lot that we don't know about God's nature.
Why is the Father referred to as Father?
These are getting into be really deep religious
Okay.
questions, and I'm trying to do science on this channel. I do have another
I mean, I'm
religious channel that we
do
could
you?
talk on. Um,
Sure.
but okay, but Father, that is how Jesus uh, referred to him, and that's how he's referred to a lot of times in the Old Testament as well. Well, a few times in the Old Testament.
Does that
So,
imply maleness or I mean, I suppose it does,
well,
doesn't it?
this is in I think this is the way that God has chosen, at least if you believe the revelation of the Bible, that this is, and I do, that God has chosen to reveal himself as Father, and Jesus was born as a man. But does that mean God is male? No, I don't think that we think God is male. Like, I don't
Right.
think, that, so.
He doesn't have an XY chromosome arrangement, for instance. Yes.
Well, Jesus probably did.
Jesus probably did, right? Yeah, because he's corporeal human being.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
yeah. So, um
and we're getting sidetracked, and that's probably
I know.
because
And
like
see, and now, like, all the people who are like supporting me as creationist, I already see like heresy for saying that God appeared to me as a woman. I'm
oh
not
boy.
saying God is female. I'm not saying God is a woman. I'm saying God appeared to me in a dream in the form of a woman at one
And you
time.
said that he may not necessarily be a he.
Well, I think
You
trying
said
to
it.
I think trying to, well, that's if the I'm saying to me, I referred to God as he, but that doesn't mean that I have a strictly strict view of like God as gendered. Okay, I don't see God as gendered in the way that humans are gendered. And the reason I said I opened it today is because I'm including possibilities of other religions being correct, even though I have a religion that I believe is true. And so that's the way that I operate. But I'm, leaving it open for those like yourself who think the idea that might be more feasible is multiple creators creating.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually when I look at and that's kind of what I was kind of getting at is that when you look if you try to suss out purpose when you look at the diversity of life, you have to draw the conclusion that there are multiple designers.
Well, and actually, I told you, and I still think that's a very unique take, and I've never heard somebody have that idea. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty interesting way of thinking about things. So
Yep.
yeah, thanks for sharing that idea.
Yes.
And thank you everybody for watching. Appreciate it. And so thank you, Dr. Thompson, for being here. Appreciate the
Of
conversation
course.
and have a good day.
You too.